The Snow Daughter and the Fire Son? There was once upon a time a man and his wife, and they had no children, which was a great grief to them. One winter's day, when the sun was shining brightly, the couple was standing outside their cottage, and the woman was looking at all the little icicles which hung from the roof. She sighed, and turning to her husband said, "I wish I had as many children as there are icicles hanging there." "Nothing would please me more either," replied her husband. Then a tiny icicle detached itself from the roof and dropped into the woman's mouth, who swallowed it with a smile and said, "Perhaps I shall give birth to a snow child now." Her husband laughed at his wife's strange idea, and they went back into the house. But after a short time the woman gave birth to a little girl who was as white as snow and as cold as ice. If they brought the child anywhere near the fire, it screamed loudly till they put it back into some cool place. The little maid throve wonderfully, and in a few months she could run about and speak. But she was not altogether easy to bring up, and gave her parents much trouble and anxiety. For all summer she insisted on spending in the cellar, and in the winter she would sleep outside in the snow, and the colder it was, the happier she seemed to be. Her father and mother called her simply "our Snow Daughter," and this name stuck to her all her life. One day her parents sat by the fire, talking over the extraordinary behavior of their daughter, who was disporting herself in the snowstorm that raged outside. The woman sighed deeply and said, "I wish I had given birth to a fire son." As she said these words, a spark from the big wood fire flew into the woman's lap, and she said with a laugh, "Now perhaps I shall give birth to a fire son." The man laughed at his wife's words and thought it was a good joke, but he ceased to think it a joke when his wife shortly afterwards gave birth to a boy, who screamed lustily till he was put quite close to the fire, and who nearly yelled himself into a fit if the Snow Daughter came anywhere near him. The Snow Daughter herself avoided him as much as she could, and always crept into a corner as far away from him as possible. The parents called the boy simply "our Fire Son," a name which stuck to him all his life. They had a great deal of trouble and worry with him too, but he throve and grew very quickly, and before he was a year old he could run about and talk. He was as red as fire and as hot to touch, and he always sat on the hearth quite close to the fire and complained of the cold. If his sister were in the room, he almost crept into the flames, while the girl on her part always complained of the great heat if her brother were anywhere near. In summer, the boy always lay out in the sun, while the girl hid herself in the cellar, so it happened that the brother and sister came very little into contact with each other. In fact, they carefully avoided it. Just as the girl grew up into a beautiful woman, her father and mother both died one after the other. Then the Fire Son, who had grown up in the meantime into a fine, strong young man, said to his sister, "I am going out into the world, for what is the use of remaining on here?" "I shall go with you," she answered, "for, except you, I have no one in the world, and I have a feeling that if we set out together we shall be lucky." The Fire Son said, "I love you with all my heart, but at the same time I always freeze if you are near me, and you nearly die of heat if I approach you. How shall we travel about together without being odious, the one to the other?" "Don't worry about that," replied the girl, "for I've thought it all over, and have settled on a plan which will make us each able to bear with the other. See, I have had a fur cloak made for each of us, and if we put them on, I shall not feel the heat so much, nor you the cold." So they put on the fur cloaks and set out cheerfully on their way, and for the first time in their lives quite happy in each other's company. For a long time the Fire Son and the Snow Daughter wandered through the world, and when at the beginning of winter they came to a big wood, they determined to stay there till spring, The Fire Son built himself a hut, where he always kept up a huge fire, while his sister, with very few clothes on, stayed outside night and day. Now it happened one day that the king of the land held a hunt in this wood, and saw the Snow Daughter wandering about in the open air. He wondered very much who the beautiful girl clad in such garments could be, and he stopped and spoke to her. He soon learnt that she could not stand heat, and that her brother could not endure cold. The king was so charmed by the Snow Daughter that he asked her to be his wife. The girl consented, and the wedding was held with much state. The king had a huge house of ice made for his wife underground, so that even in summer it did not melt. But for his brother-in-law he had a house built with huge ovens all round it, that were kept heated all day and night. The Fire Son was delighted, but the perpetual heat in which he lived made his body so hot that it was dangerous to go too close to him. One day the king gave a great feast, and asked his brother-in-law among the other guests. The Fire Son did not appear till everyone had assembled, and when he did, everyone fled outside to the open air. So intense was the heat he gave forth. Then the king was very angry and said, "If I had known what a lot of trouble you would have been, I would never have taken you into my house." Then the Fire Son replied with a laugh, "Don't be angry, dear brother. I love heat, and my sister loves cold. Come here and let me embrace you, and then I'll go home at once." And before the king had time to reply, the Fire Son seized him in a tight embrace. The king screamed aloud in agony, and when his wife, the Snow Daughter, who had taken refuge from her brother in the next room, hurried to him, the king lay dead on the ground, burnt to a cinder. When the Snow Daughter saw this, she turned on her brother and flew at him. Then a fight began, the like of which had never been seen on earth. When the people, attracted by the noise, hurried to the spot, they saw the Snow Daughter melting into water and the Fire Son burned to a cinder. And so ended the unhappy brother and sister. The Steadfast Tin Soldier. There were once upon a time 25 tin soldiers, all brothers, as they were made out of the same old tin spoon. Their uniform was red and blue, and they shouldered their guns and looked straight in front of them. The first words that they heard in this world, when the lid of the box in which they lay was taken off, were, "Hurrah, tin soldiers!" This was exclaimed by a little boy, clapping his hands. They had been given to him because it was his birthday, and now he began setting them out on the table. Each soldier was exactly like the other in shape, except just one, who had been made last when the tin had run short, but there he stood as firmly on his one leg as the others did on two, and he is the one that became famous. There were many other playthings on the table on which they were being set out, but the nicest of all was a pretty little castle made of cardboard, with windows through which you could see into the rooms. In front of the castle stood some little trees, surrounding a tiny mirror which looked like a lake. Wax swans were floating about and reflecting themselves in it. That was all very pretty, but the most beautiful thing was a little lady who stood in the open doorway. She was cut out of paper, but she had on a dress of the finest muslin, with a scarf of narrow blue ribbon round her shoulders, fastened in the middle with a glittering rose made of gold paper, which was as large as her head. The little lady was stretching out both her arms, for she was a dancer, and was lifting up one leg so high in the air that the tin soldier couldn't find it anywhere, and thought that she, too, had only one leg. "That's the wife for me," he thought, "but she is so grand and lives in a castle, whilst I have only a box with 24 others. This is no place for her, but I must make her acquaintance." Then he stretched himself out behind a snuff-box that lay on the table. From thence he could watch the dainty little lady, who continued to stand on one leg without losing her balance. When the night came, all the other tin soldiers went into their box, and the people of the house went to bed. Then the toys began to play at visiting, dancing, and fighting. The tin soldiers rattled in their box, for they wanted to be out too, but they could not raise the lid. The nutcrackers played at leapfrog, and the slate pencil ran about the slate. There was such a noise that the canary woke up and began to talk to them, in poetry too. The only two who did not stir from their places were the tin soldier and the little dancer. She remained on tiptoe with both arms outstretched. He stood steadfastly on his one leg, never moving his eyes from her face. The clock struck 12, and crack! Off flew the lid of the snuff-box. But there was no snuff inside, only a little black imp. That was the beauty of it. "Hello, tin soldier," said the imp. "Don't look at things that aren't intended for the likes of you." But the tin soldier took no notice and seemed not to hear. "Very well, wait till tomorrow," said the imp. When it was morning and the children had got up, the tin soldier was put in the window, and whether it was the wind or the little black imp, I don't know. But all at once the window flew open, and out fell the little tin soldier head over heels from the third-story window. That was a terrible fall, I can tell you. He landed on his head with his leg in the air, his gun being wedged between two paving stones. The nursery maid and the little boy came down at once to look for him, but though they were so near him that they almost trod on him, they did not notice him. If the tin soldier had only called out, "Here I am!" they must have found him, but he did not think it fitting for him to cry out, because he had on his uniform. Soon it began to drizzle. Then the drops came faster, and there was a regular downpour. When it was over, two little street boys came along. "Just look!" cried one. "Here is the tin soldier. He shall sail up and down in a boat." So they made a little boat out of newspaper, put the tin soldier in it, and made him sail up and down the gutter. Both the boys ran along beside him, clapping their hands. What great waves there were in the gutter, and what a swift current! The paper boat tossed up and down, and in the middle of the stream it went so quick that the tin soldier trembled. But he remained steadfast, showed no emotion, looked straight in front of him, shouldering his gun. All at once the boat passed under a long tunnel that was as dark as his box had been. "Where can I be coming now?" he wondered. "Oh dear, this is the black imp's fault. Ah, if only the little lady was sitting beside me in the boat, it might be twice as dark for all I should care." Suddenly there came along a great water rat that lived in the tunnel. "Have you a passport?" asked the rat. "Out with your passport!" But the tin soldier was silent and grasped his gun more firmly. The boat sped on, and the rat behind it. Oh, how he showed his teeth as he cried to the chips of wood and straw, "Hold him! Hold him! He has not paid the toll. He has not shown his passport." But the current became swifter and stronger. The tin soldier could already see daylight where the tunnel ended, but in his ears there sounded a roaring enough to frighten any brave man. Only think! At the end of the tunnel, the gutter discharged itself into a great canal. That would be just as dangerous for him as it would be for us to go down a waterfall. Now he was so near to it that he could not hold on any longer. On went the boat, the poor tin soldier keeping himself as stiff as he could. No one should say of him afterwards that he had flinched. The boat whirled 3, 4 times round, and became filled to the brim with water. It began to sink. The tin soldier was standing up to his neck in water, and deeper sank the boat, and softer grew the paper. Now the water was over his head. He was thinking of the pretty little dancer, whose face he should never see again, and there sounded in his ears, over and over again, "Forward, forward, soldier bold! Death's before thee, grim and cold." The paper came in two. and the soldier fell. But at that moment he was swallowed by a great fish. Oh, how dark it was inside, even darker than in the tunnel. And it was really very close quarters. But there the steadfast little tin soldier lay full length, shouldering his gun. Up and down swam the fish. Then he made the most dreadful contortions, and became suddenly quite still. Then it was as if a flash of lightning had passed through him. The daylight streamed in, and a voice exclaimed, "Why, here is the little tin soldier!" The fish had been caught, taken to market, sold, and brought into the kitchen, where the cook had cut it open with a great knife. She took up the soldier between her finger and thumb and carried him into the room, where everyone wanted to see the hero who had been found inside a fish. But the tin soldier was not at all proud. They put him on the table and— No, but what strange things do happen in this world! The tin soldier was in the same room in which he had been before. He saw the same children and the same toys on the table, and there was the same grand castle with the pretty little dancer. She was still standing on one leg with the other high in the air. She too was steadfast. That touched the tin soldier. He was nearly going to shed tin tears, but that would not have been fitting for a soldier. He looked at her, but she said nothing. All at once one of the little boys took up the tin soldier and threw him into the stove, giving no reasons. But doubtless the little black imp in the snuff-box was at the bottom of this too. There the tin soldier lay, and felt a heat that was truly terrible. But whether he was suffering from actual fire or from the ardour of his passion, he did not know. All his colour had disappeared. Whether this had happened on his travels, or whether it was the result of trouble, who can say? He looked at the little lady. She looked at him, and he felt that he was melting, but he remained steadfast with his gun at his shoulder. Suddenly a door opened. The draught caught up the little dancer, and off she flew like a sylph to the tin soldier in the stove, burst into flames, and that was the end of her. Then the tin soldier melted down into a little lump, and when next morning the maid was taking out the ashes, she found him in the shape of a heart. There was nothing left of the little dancer but her gilt rose, burnt as black as a cinder. The story of Big Klaus and Little Klaus. In a certain village there lived two people who had both the same name. Both were called Klaus, but one owned 4 horses and the other only 1. In order to distinguish the one from the other, the one who had 4 horses was called Big Klaus, and the one who had only 1 horse, Little Klaus. Now you shall hear what befell them both, for this is a true story. The whole week through Little Klaus had to plough for Big Klaus, and lent him his 1 horse. Then Big Klaus lent him his 4 horses, but only once a week, and that was on Sunday. Hurrah! How loudly Little Klaus cracked his whip over all the 5 horses, for they were indeed as good as his on this one day. The sun shone brightly, and all the bells in the church towers were pealing. The people were dressed in their best clothes and were going to church, with their hymn books under their arms, to hear the minister preach. They saw Little Klaus ploughing with the 5 horses, but he was so happy that he kept on cracking his whip and calling out, "Gee up, my 5 horses!" "You mustn't say that," said Big Klaus. "Only 1 horse is yours." But as soon as someone else was going by, Little Klaus forgot that he must not say it, and called out, "Gee up, my 5 horses!" "Now you had better stop that," said Big Klaus, "for if you say it once more, I will give your horse such a crack on the head that it will drop down dead on the spot." "I really won't say it." "Again," said Little Klaus. But as soon as more people passed by and nodded him "Good morning," he became so happy in thinking how well it looked to have 5 horses ploughing his field that, Cracking his whip, he called out, "Gee up, my 5 horses." "I'll see to your horses," said Big Klaus, and, seizing an iron bar, he struck Little Klaus's one horse such a blow on the head that it fell down and died on the spot. "Alas, now I have no horse," said Little Klaus, beginning to cry. Then he flayed the skin off his horse, dried it, and put it in a sack, which he threw over his shoulder, and went into the town to sell it. He had a long way to go, and had to pass through a great dark forest. A dreadful storm came on, in which he lost his way, and before he could get on to the right road, night came on, and it was impossible to reach the town that evening. Right in front of him was a large farmhouse. The window shutters were closed, but the light came through the chinks. "I should very much like to be allowed to spend the night there," thought Little Klaus, and he went and knocked at the door. The farmer's wife opened it, but when she heard what he wanted, she told him to go away. Her husband was not at home, and she took in no strangers. "Well, I must lie down outside," said Little Klaus, and the farmer's wife shut the door in his face. Close by stood a large haystack, and between it and the house a little outhouse, covered with a flat thatched roof. "I can lie down there," thought Little Klaus, looking at the roof. "It will make a splendid bed, if only the stork won't fly down and bite my legs." For a live stork was standing on the roof, where it had its nest. So Little Klaus crept up into the outhouse, where he lay down and made himself comfortable for the night. The wooden shutters over the windows were not shut at the top, and he could just see into the room. There stood a large table, spread with wine and roast meat and a beautiful fish. The farmer's wife and the sexton sat at the table, but there was no one else. She was filling up his glass, while he stuck his fork into the fish, which was his favorite dish. "If one could only get some of that," thought Little Klaus, stretching his head towards the window. Ah, what delicious cakes he saw standing there! It was a feast. Then he heard someone riding along the road towards the house. It was the farmer coming home. He was a very worthy man, but he had one great peculiarity, namely, that he could not bear to see a sexton. If he saw one, he was made quite mad. That was why the sexton had gone to say good day to the farmer's wife when he knew that her husband was not at home, and the good woman therefore put in front of him the best food she had. But when they heard the farmer coming, they were frightened, and the farmer's wife begged the sexton to creep into a great empty chest. He did so, as he knew the poor man could not bear to see a sexton. The wife hastily hid all the beautiful food and the wine in her oven, for if her husband had seen it, he would have been sure to ask what it all meant. "Oh dear," groaned Little Klaus up in the shed when he saw the good food disappearing. "Is anybody up there?" asked the farmer, catching sight of Little Klaus. "Why are you lying there? Come with me into the house." Then Little Klaus told him how he had lost his way, and begged to be allowed to spend the night there. "Yes, certainly," said the farmer, "but we must first have something to eat." The wife received them both very kindly, spread a long table, and gave them a large plate of porridge. The farmer was hungry, and ate with a good appetite. But Little Klaus could not help thinking of the delicious dishes of fish and roast meats and cakes which he knew were in the oven. Under the table at his feet he had laid the sack with the horse skin in it, for, as we know, he was going to the town to sell it. The porridge did not taste good to him, so he trod upon his sack, and the dry skin in the sack squeaked loudly. "Hush!" said Little Klaus to his sack, at the same time treading on it again, so that it squeaked even louder than before. "Hello, what have you got in your sack?" asked the farmer. "Oh, it is a wizard," said Little Klaus. "He says we should not eat porridge, for he has conjured the whole oven full of roast meats and fish and cakes." "Goodness me," said the farmer, and opening the oven, he saw all the delicious, tempting dishes his wife had hidden there, but which he now believed the wizard in the sack had conjured up for them. The wife could say nothing, but she put the food at once on the table, and they ate the fish, the roast meat, and the cakes. Little Klaus now trod again on his sack, so that the skin squeaked. "What does he say now?" asked the farmer. "He says," replied Little Clans, "that he has also conjured up for us 3 bottles of wine. They are standing in the corner by the oven." The wife had to fetch the wine which she had hidden, and the farmer drank and grew very merry. He would very much like to have had such a wizard as Little Klaus had in the sack. "Can he conjure up the devil?" asked the farmer. "I should like to see him very much, for I feel just now in very good spirits." "Yes," said Little Klaus, "my wizard can do everything that I ask." "Isn't that true?" he asked, treading on the sack so that it squeaked. "Do you hear? He says, yes, but that the devil looks so ugly that we should not like to see him." "Oh, I'm not at all afraid." "What does he look like?" "He will show himself in the shape of a sexton." "I say," said the farmer, "he must be ugly." "You must know that I can't bear to look at a sexton. But it doesn't matter. I know that it is the devil, and I shan't mind. I feel up to it now. But he must not come too near me." "I must ask my wizard," said Little Klaus, treading on the sack and putting his ear to it. "What does he say?" "He says you can open the chest in the corner there, and you will see the devil squatting inside it. But you must hold the lid so that he shall not escape." "Will you help me to hold him?" begged the farmer, going towards the chest where his wife had hidden the real sexton, who was sitting inside in a terrible fright. The farmer opened the lid a little way and saw him inside. "Ugh!" he shrieked, springing back. "Yes, now I have seen him. He looked just like our sexton." Oh, it was horrid. So he had to drink again, and they drank till far on into the night. "You must sell me the wizard," said the farmer. "Ask anything you like. I will pay you down a bushelful of money on the spot." "No, I really can't," said Little Clans. "Just think how many things I can get from this wizard." "Ah, I should like to have him so much," said the farmer, begging very hard. "Well," said Little Klaus at last, "as you have been so good as to give me shelter tonight, I will sell him. You shall have the wizard for a bushel of money, but I must have full measure." "That you shall," said the farmer, "but you must take the chest with you. I won't keep it another hour in the house. Who knows that he isn't in there still?" Little Klaus gave the farmer his sack with the dry skin, and got instead a good bushelful of money. The farmer also gave him a wheelbarrow to carry away his money and the chest. "Farewell," said Little Klaus, and away he went with his money and the big chest, wherein sat the sexton. On the other side of the wood was a large, deep river. The water flowed so rapidly that you could scarcely swim against the stream. A great new bridge had been built over it, on the middle of which Little Klaus stopped, and said aloud so that the sexton might hear, "Now! What am I to do with this stupid chest? It is as heavy as if it were filled with stones. I shall only be tired dragging it along. I will throw it into the river. If it swims home to me, well and good, and if it doesn't, it's no matter." Then he took the chest with one hand and lifted it up a little, as if he were going to throw it into the water. "No, don't do that," called out the sexton in the chest. "Let me get out first." "Oh, oh," said Little Klaus, pretending that he was afraid. "He is still in there. I must throw him quickly into the water to drown him." "Oh, no, no," cried the sexton. I will give you a whole bushelful of money if you will let me go." "Ah, that's quite another thing," said Little Klaus, opening the chest. The sexton crept out very quickly, pushed the empty chest into the water, and went to his house, where he gave Little Klaus a bushel of money. One he had had already from the farmer, and now he had his wheelbarrow full of money. "Well, I have got a good price for the horse," said he to himself, when he shook all his money out in a heap in his room. "This will put Big Klaus in a rage when he hears how rich I have become through my one horse, but I won't tell him just yet." So he sent a boy to Big Klaus to borrow a bushel measure from him. "Now, what can he want with it?" thought Big Klaus, and he smeared some tar at the bottom, so that of whatever was measured a little should remain in it. And this is just what happened, for when he got his measure back, 3 new silver 5-shilling pieces were sticking to it. "What does this mean?" said Big Klaus, and he ran off at once to Little Klaus. "Where did you get so much money from?" "Oh, that was from my horse skin. I sold it yesterday evening." "That's certainly a good price," said Big Klaus, and running home in great haste, he took an axe, knocked all his 4 horses on the head, skinned them, and went into the town. "Skins! Skins! Who will buy skins?" he cried through the streets. All the shoemakers and tanners came running to ask him what he wanted for them. "A bushel of money for each," said Big Klaus. "Are you mad?" they all exclaimed. "Do you think we have money by the bushel? Skins! Skins!" "Who will buy skins?" he cried again, and to all who asked him what they cost, he answered, "A bushel of money." "He is making game of us," they said, and the shoemakers seized their yard measures and the tanners their leathern aprons, and they gave Big Klaus a good beating. "Skins, skins," they cried mockingly. "Yes, we will tan your skin for you." "Out of the town with him," they shouted, and Big Klaus had to hurry off as quickly as he could, if he wanted to save his life. "Aha!" said he when he came home. "Little Klaus shall pay dearly for this. I will kill him." Little Klaus's grandmother had just died. Though she had been very unkind to him, he was very much distressed, and he took the dead woman and laid her in his warm bed to try if he could not bring her back to life. There she lay the whole night, while he sat in the corner and slept on a chair, which he had often done before. And in the night, as he sat there, the door opened, and Big Klaus came in with his axe. He knew quite well where Little Klaus's bed stood, and going up to it, he struck the grandmother on the head just where he thought Little Klaus would be. "There," said he, "now you won't get the best of me again." And he went home. "What a very wicked man," thought Little Klaus. "He was going to kill me. It was a good thing for my grandmother that she was dead already, or else he would have killed her." Then he dressed his grandmother in her Sunday clothes, borrowed a horse from his neighbor, harnessed the cart to it, sat his grandmother on the back seat so that she could not fall out when he drove, and away they went. When the sun rose, they were in front of a large inn. Little Klaus got down and went in to get something to drink. The host was very rich. He was a very worthy but hot-tempered man. "Good morning," said he to Little Klaus. "You are early on the road." "Yes," said Little Klaus. "I am going to the town with my grandmother. She is sitting outside in the cart. I cannot bring her in. Will you not give her a glass of mead? But you will have to speak loud, for she is very hard of hearing." "Oh, yes, certainly I will," said the host, and, pouring out a large glass of mead, he took it out to the dead grandmother, who was sitting upright in the cart. "Here is a glass of mead from your son," said the host, but the dead woman did not answer a word, and sat still. "Don't you hear?" cried the host as loud as he could. "Here is a glass of mead from your son." Then he shouted the same thing again and yet again, but she never moved in her place, and at last he grew angry, threw the glass in her face, so that she fell back into the cart, for she was not tied in her place. "Hullo!" cried little Klaus, running out of the door, and seizing the host by the throat. "You have killed my grandmother. Look, there is a great hole in her forehead." "Oh, what a misfortune!" cried the host, wringing his hands. "It all comes from my hot temper. Dear little Klaus, I will give you a bushel of money and will bury your grandmother as if she were my own. Only don't tell about it, or I shall have my head cut off, and that would be very uncomfortable." So little Klaus got a bushel of money, and the host buried his grandmother as if she had been his own. Now, when little Klaus again reached home with so much money, he sent his boy to Big Klaus to borrow his bushel measure. "What's this?" said Big Klaus. "Didn't I kill him? I must see to this myself." So he went himself to little Klaus with the measure. "Well now, where did you get all this money?" asked he, opening his eyes at the heap. "You killed my grandmother." "Not me," said little Klaus. "I sold her and got a bushel of money for her." "That is indeed a good price," said Big Klaus, and, hurrying home, he took an axe and killed his grandmother, laid her in the cart, and drove off to the apothecary's and asked whether he wanted to buy a dead body. "Who is it, and how did you get it?" asked the apothecary. "It is my grandmother," said Big Klaus. "I killed her in order to get a bushel of money." "You are mad," said the apothecary. "Don't mention such things, or you will lose your head." And he began to tell him what a dreadful thing he had done, and what a wicked man he was, and that he ought to be punished, till Big Klaus was so frightened that he jumped into the cart and drove home as hard as he could. The apothecary and all the people thought he must be mad, so they let him go. "You shall pay for this," said Big Klaus as he drove home. "You shall pay for this dearly, little Klaus." So as soon as he got home, he took the largest sack he could find, and went to little Klaus and said, "You have fooled me again. First I killed my horses, then my grandmother. It is all your fault, but you shan't do it again." And he seized little Klaus, pushed him in the sack, threw it over his shoulder, crying out, "Now I am going to drown you." He had to go a long way before he came to the river, and little Klaus was not very light. The road passed by the church, the organ was sounding, and the people were singing most beautifully. Big Klaus put down the sack with little Klaus in it by the church door, and thought that he might as well go in and hear a psalm before going on farther. Little Klaus could not get out, and everybody was in church, so he went in. "Oh dear, oh dear," groaned little Klaus in the sack, twisting and turning himself. But he could not undo the string. There came by an old, old shepherd, with snow-white hair, and a long staff in his hand. He was driving a herd of cows and oxen. These pushed against the sack so that it was overturned. "Alas," moaned little Clans, "I am so young, and yet I must die." "And I, poor man," said the cattle driver, "I am so old, and yet I cannot die." "Open the sack," called out little Klaus. "Creep in here instead of me, and you will die in a moment." "I will gladly do that," said the cattle driver, and he opened the sack, and little Klaus struggled out at once. "You will take care of the cattle, won't you?" asked the old man, creeping into the sack, which little Klaus fastened up, and then went on with the cows and oxen. Soon after, Big Klaus came out of the church, and taking up the sack on his shoulders, it seemed to him as if it had become lighter, for the old cattle driver was not half as heavy as little Klaus. "How easy he is to carry now! That must be because I heard part of the service." So he went to the river, which was deep and broad, threw in the sack with the old driver, and called after it, for he thought little Klaus was inside. "Down you go! You won't mock me any more now!" Then he went home, but when he came to the crossroads, there he met little Klaus, who was driving his cattle. "What's this?" said Big Klaus. "Haven't I drowned you?" "Yes," replied little Klaus. "You threw me into the river a good half-hour ago." "But how did you get those splendid cattle?" asked Big Klaus. "They are sea cattle," said little Klaus. "I will tell you the whole story. And I thank you for having drowned me, because now I am on dry land and really rich. How frightened I was when I was in the sack. How the wind whistled in my ears as you threw me from the bridge into the cold water. I sank at once to the bottom, but I did not hurt myself, for underneath was growing the most beautiful soft grass. I fell on this, and immediately the sack opened. The loveliest maiden in snow-white garments, with a green garland round her wet hair, took me by the hand and said, "Are you, little Klaus? Here are some cattle for you to begin with, and a mile farther down the road there is another herd, which I will give you as a present." Now I saw that the river was a great high road for the sea people. Along it they travel underneath from the sea to the land till the river ends. It was so beautiful, full of flowers and fresh grass. The fishes which were swimming in the water shot past my ears, as the birds do here in the air. What lovely people there were, and what fine cattle were grazing in the ditches and dikes. "But why did you come up to us again?" asked Big Klaus. "I should not have done so, if it is so beautiful down below." "Oh," said little Klaus, "that was just so politic of me. You heard what I told you, that the sea maiden said to me a mile farther along the road, and by the road she meant the river, for she can go by no other way. There was another herd of cattle waiting for me, but I know what windings the river makes, now here, now there, so that it is a long way round. Therefore it makes it much shorter if one comes on the land and drives across the field to the river. Thus I have spared myself quite half a mile, and have come much quicker to my sea cattle." "Oh, you're a lucky fellow," said Big Klaus. "Do you think I should also get some cattle if I went to the bottom of the river?" "Oh, yes, I think so," said little Klaus. "But I can't carry you in a sack to the river. You are too heavy for me. If you like to go there yourself and then creep into the sack, I will throw you in with the greatest of pleasure." "Thank you," said Big Klaus. "But if I don't get any sea cattle when I come there, you will have a good hiding. Mind." "Oh, no, don't be so hard on me." Then they went to the river. When the cattle, which were thirsty, caught sight of the water, they ran as quickly as they could to drink. "Look how they are running," said little Klaus. "They want to go to the bottom again." "Yes, but help me first," said Big Klaus, "or else you shall have a beating." And so he crept into the large sack, which was lying on the back of one of the oxen. "Put a stone in, for I am afraid I may not reach the bottom," said Big Klaus. "It goes all right," said little Klaus, but still he laid a big stone in the sack, fastened it up tight, and then pushed it in. Plump! There was Big Klaus in the water, and he sank like lead to the bottom. "I doubt if he will find any cattle," said little Klaus as he drove his own home. The Story of King Frost. There was once upon a time a peasant woman who had a daughter and a stepdaughter. The daughter had her own way in everything, and whatever she did was right in her mother's eyes. But the poor stepdaughter had a hard time. Let her do what she would, she was always blamed, and got small thanks for all the trouble she took. Nothing was right, everything wrong. And yet, if the truth were known, The girl was worth her weight in gold. She was so unselfish and good-hearted. But her stepmother did not like her, and the poor girl's days were spent in weeping, for it was impossible to live peacefully with the woman. The wicked shrew was determined to get rid of the girl by fair means or foul, and kept saying to her father, "Send her away, old man, send her away, anywhere so that my eyes shan't be plagued any longer by the sight of her, or my ears tormented by the sound of her voice. Send her out into the fields, and let the cutting frost do for her." In vain did the poor old father weep and implore her pity. She was firm, and he dared not gainsay her. So he placed his daughter in a sledge, not even daring to give her a horsecloth to keep herself warm with, and drove her out onto the bare, open fields, where he kissed her and left her, driving home as fast as he could, that he might not witness her miserable death. Deserted by her father, the poor girl sat down under a fir tree at the edge of the forest and began to weep silently. Suddenly she heard a faint sound. It was King Frost sprinting from tree to tree and cracking his fingers as he went. At length he reached the fir tree beneath which she was sitting, and with a crisp crackling sound he alighted beside her and looked at her lovely face. "Well, maiden," he snapped out, "do you know who I am? I am King Frost, King of the Red Noses." "All hail to you, great king," answered the girl in a gentle, trembling voice. "Have you come to take me?" "Are you warm, maiden?" he replied. "Quite warm, King Frost," she answered, though she shivered as she spoke. Then King Frost stooped down and bent over the girl, and the crackling sound grew louder, and the air seemed to be full of knives and darts, and again he asked, "Maiden, are you warm? Are you warm, you beautiful girl?" And though her breath was almost frozen on her lips, she whispered gently, "Quite warm, King Frost." Then King Frost gnashed his teeth and cracked his fingers, and his eyes sparkled, and the crackling, crisp sound was louder than ever. And for the last time he asked her, "Maiden, are you still warm? Are you still warm, little love?" And the poor girl was so stiff and numb that she could just gasp, "Still warm, O king." Now her gentle, courteous words and her uncomplaining ways touched King Frost, and he had pity on her, and he wrapped her up in furs and covered her with blankets, and he fetched a great box in which were beautiful jewels and a rich robe embroidered in gold and silver. And she put it on and looked more lovely than ever, and King Frost stepped with her into his sledge with 6 white horses. In the meantime, the wicked stepmother was waiting at home for news of the girl's death, and preparing pancakes for the funeral feast. And she said to her husband, "Old man, you had better go out into the fields and find your daughter's body and bury her." Just as the old man was leaving the house, the little dog under the table began to bark, saying, "Your daughter shall live to be your delight. Her daughter shall die this very night." "Hold your tongue, you foolish beast," scolded the woman. "There's a pancake for you. But you must say, 'Her daughter shall have much silver and gold. His daughter is frozen quite stiff and cold.'" But the doggy ate up the pancake and barked, saying, "His daughter shall wear a crown on her head. Her daughter shall die unwooed, unwed." Then the old woman tried to coax the doggy with more pancakes and to terrify it with blows, but he barked on, always repeating the same words. And suddenly the door creaked and flew open, and a great heavy chest was pushed in, and behind it came the stepdaughter, radiant and beautiful, in a dress all glittering with silver and gold. For a moment the stepmother's eyes were dazzled. Then she called to her husband, "Old man, yoke the horses at once into the sledge, and take my daughter to the same field, and leave her on the same spot exactly." And so the old man took the girl and left her beneath the same tree where he had parted from his daughter. In a few minutes King Frost came past, and, looking at the girl, he said, "Are you warm, maiden? What a blind old fool you must be to ask such a question," she answered angrily. "Can't you see that my hands and feet are nearly frozen?" Then King Frost sprang to and fro in front of her, questioning her, and getting only rude, rough words in reply, till at last he got very angry, and cracked his fingers, and gnashed his teeth, and froze her to death. But in the hut her mother was waiting for her return, and as she grew impatient, she said to her husband, "Get out the horses, old man, to go and fetch her home, but see that you are careful not to upset the sledge and lose the chest." But the doggy beneath the table began to bark, saying, "Your daughter is frozen quite stiff and cold, and shall never have a chest full of gold." "Don't tell such wicked lies," scolded the woman. "There's a cake for you. Now say, 'Here, daughter, shall marry a mighty king.'" At that moment the door flew open, and she rushed out to meet her daughter. And as she took her frozen body in her arms, she too was chilled to death. The swineherd. There was once a poor prince. He possessed a kingdom which, though small, was yet large enough for him to marry on, and married he wished to be. Now it was certainly a little audacious of him to venture to say to the emperor's daughter, "Will you marry me?" But he did venture to say so, for his name was known far and wide. There were hundreds of princesses who would gladly have said yes, but would she say the same? Well, we shall see. On the grave of the prince's father grew a rose tree, a very beautiful rose tree. It only bloomed every 5 years, and then bore but a single rose, but oh, such a rose! Its scent was so sweet that when you smelt it you forgot all your cares and troubles. And he had also a nightingale which could sing as if all the beautiful melodies in the world were shut up in its little throat. This rose and this nightingale the princess was to have, and so they were both put into silver caskets and sent to her. The emperor had them brought to him in the great hall where the princess was playing. Here comes a duke a-riding with her ladies in waiting, and when she caught sight of the big caskets which contained the presents, she clapped her hands for joy. "If only it were a little pussy-cat," she said. But the rose tree with the beautiful rose came out. "But how prettily it is made," said all the ladies in waiting. "It is more than pretty," said the emperor. "It is charming." But the princess felt it, and then she almost began to cry. "Ugh, papa," she said, "it is not artificial, it is real." "Ugh," said all the ladies in waiting, "it is real." "Let us see first what is in the other casket before we begin to be angry," thought the emperor, and there came out the nightingale. It sang so beautifully that one could scarcely utter a cross word against it. "Superbe, charmant," said the ladies in waiting, for they all chattered French, each one worse than the other. "How much the bird reminds me of the musical snuff-box of the late empress," said an old courtier. "Ah, yes, it is the same tone, the same execution." "Yes," said the emperor, and then he wept like a little child. "I hope that this, at least, is not real?" asked the princess. "Yes, it is a real bird," said those who had brought it. "Then let the bird fly away," said the princess, and she would not on any account allow the prince to come. But he was nothing daunted. He painted his face brown and black, drew his cap well over his face, and knocked at the door. "Good day, Emperor," he said. "Can I get a place here as servant in the castle?" "Yes," said the emperor. "But there are so many who ask for a place that I don't know whether there will be one for you. But still, I will think of you. Stay. It has just occurred to me that I want someone to look after the swine, for I have so very many of them." And the prince got the situation of imperial swineherd. He had a wretched little room close to the pigsties. Here he had to stay, but the whole day he sat working. And when evening was come, he had made a pretty little pot. All round it were little bells, and when the pot boiled, they jingled most beautifully and played the old tune. "Where is Augustus, dear? Alas, he's not here, here." But the most wonderful thing was that when one held one's finger in the steam of the pot, then at once one could smell what dinner was ready in any fireplace in the town. That was indeed something quite different from the rose. Now the princess came walking past with all her ladies, and when she heard the tune she stood still, and her face beamed with joy, for she also could play, "Where is Augustus, dear?" It was the only tune she knew, but that she could play with one finger. "Why, that is what I play," she said. "He must be a most accomplished swineherd. Listen, go down and ask him what the instrument costs." And one of the ladies in waiting had to go down, but she put on wooden clogs. "What will you take for the pot?" asked the lady in waiting. "I will have 10 kisses from the princess," answered the swineherd. "Heaven forbid," said the lady in waiting. "Yes, I will sell it for nothing less," replied the swineherd. "Well, what does he say?" asked the princess. "I really hardly like to tell you," answered the lady in waiting. "Oh, then you can whisper it to me." "He is disobliging," said the princess, and went away. But she had only gone a few steps when the bells rang out so prettily. "Where is Augustus, dear? Alas, he's not here, here." "Listen," said the princess. "Ask him whether he will take 10 kisses from my ladies in waiting." "No, thank you," said the swineherd. 10 kisses from the princess, or else I keep my pot." "That is very tiresome," said the princess. "But you must put yourselves in front of me, so that no one can see." And the ladies in waiting placed themselves in front and then spread out their dresses, so the swineherd got his 10 kisses and she got the pot. What happiness that was! The whole night and the whole day the pot was made to boil. There was not a fireplace in the whole town where they did not know what was being cooked, whether it was at the chancellor's or at the shoemaker's. The ladies in waiting danced and clapped their hands. "We know who is going to have soup and pancakes. We know who is going to have porridge and sausages. Isn't it interesting?" "Yes, very interesting," said the first lady in waiting. "But don't say anything about it, for I am the emperor's daughter." "Oh no, of course we won't," said everyone. The swineherd, that is to say, the prince, though they did not know he was anything but a true swineherd, let no day pass without making something, and one day he made a rattle, which, when it was turned round, played all the waltzes, galops, and polkas which had ever been known since the world began. "But that is super-bay," said the princess as she passed by. "I have never heard a more beautiful composition. Listen. Go down and ask him what this instrument costs, but I won't kiss him again." "He wants 100 kisses from the princess," said the lady in waiting, who had gone down to ask him. "I believe he is mad," said the princess, and then she went on. But she had only gone a few steps when she stopped. "One ought to encourage art," she said. "I am the emperor's daughter. Tell him he shall have, as before, 10 kisses. The rest he can take from my ladies in waiting." "But we don't at all like being kissed by him," said the ladies in waiting. "That's nonsense," said the princess. "And if I can kiss him, you can too. Besides, remember that I give you board and lodging." So the ladies in waiting had to go down to him again. 100 kisses from the princess," said he, "or each keeps his own." "Put yourselves in front of us," she said then. And so all the ladies in waiting put themselves in front, and he began to kiss the princess. "What can that commotion be by the Bixties?" asked the emperor, who was standing on the balcony. He rubbed his eyes and put on his spectacles. Why, those are the ladies in waiting playing their games. I must go down to them." So he took off his shoes, which were shoes, though he had trodden them down into slippers. What a hurry he was in, to be sure! As soon as he came into the yard, he walked very softly, and the ladies in waiting were so busy counting the kisses and seeing fair play that they never noticed the emperor. He stood on tiptoe. "What is that?" he said, when he saw the kissing, and then he threw one of his slippers at their heads, just as the swineherd was taking his 86th kiss. "Be off with you," said the emperor, for he was very angry, and the princess and the swineherd were driven out of the empire. Then she stood still and wept. The swineherd was scolding, and the rain was streaming down. "Alas, what an unhappy creature I am," sobbed the princess. "If only I had taken the beautiful prince. Alas, how unfortunate I am!" And the swineherd went behind a tree, washed the black and brown off his face, threw away his old clothes, and then stepped forward in his splendid dress, looking so beautiful that the princess was obliged to courtesy. "I now come to this. I despise you," he said. "You would have nothing to do with a noble prince. You did not understand the rose or the nightingale, but you could kiss the swineherd for the sake of a toy. This is what you get for it." And he went into his kingdom and shut the door in her face, and she had to stay outside singing, "Where's my Augustus dear? Alas, he's not here, here." The Three Brothers. There was once upon a time a witch who, in the shape of a hawk, used every night to break the windows of a certain village church. In the same village there lived three brothers who were all determined to kill the mischievous hawk. But in vain did the two eldest mount guard in the church with their guns. As soon as the bird appeared high above their heads, sleep overpowered them, and they only awoke to hear the windows crashing in. Then the youngest brother took his turn of guarding the windows, and to prevent his being overcome by sleep, he placed a lot of thorns under his chin, so that if he felt drowsy and nodded his head, they would prick him and keep him awake. The moon was already risen, and it was as light as day, when suddenly he heard a fearful noise, and at the same time a terrible desire to sleep overpowered him. His eyelids closed, and his head sank on his shoulders, but the thorns ran into him and were so painful that he awoke at once. He saw the hawk swooping down upon the church, and in a moment he had seized his gun and shot at the bird. The hawk fell heavily under a big stone, severely wounded in its right wing. The youth ran to look at it, and saw that a huge abyss had opened below the stone. He went at once to fetch his brothers, and with their help dragged a lot of pine wood and ropes to the spot. They fastened some of the burning pine wood to the end of the rope, and let it slowly down to the bottom of the abyss. At first it was quite dark, and the flaming torch only lit up dirty grey stone walls. But the youngest brother determined to explore the abyss, and letting himself down by the rope, he soon reached the bottom. Here he found a lovely meadow full of green trees and exquisite flowers. In the middle of the meadow stood a huge stone castle with an iron gate leading to it, which was wide open. Everything in the castle seemed to be made of copper, and the only inhabitant he could discover was a lovely girl who was combing her golden hair. And he noticed that whenever one of her hairs fell on the ground, it rang out like pure metal. The youth looked at her more closely, and saw that her skin was smooth and fair, her blue eyes bright and sparkling, and her hair as golden as the sun. He fell in love with her on the spot, and kneeling at her feet, he implored her to become his wife. The lovely girl accepted his proposal gladly, but at the same time she warned him that she could never come up to the world above till her mother, the old witch, was dead. And she went on to tell him that the only way in which the old creature could be killed was with the sword that hung up in the castle. But the sword was so heavy that no one could lift it. Then the youth went into a room in the castle where everything was made of silver, and here he found another beautiful girl, the sister of his bride. She was combing her silver hair, and every hair that fell on the ground rang out like pure metal. The second girl handed him the sword, but though he tried with all his strength, he could not lift it. At last a third sister came to him and gave him a drop of something to drink, which she said would give him the needful strength. He drank one drop, but still he could not lift the sword. Then he drank a second, and the sword began to move, but only after he had drunk a third drop was he able to swing the sword over his head. Then he hid himself in the castle and awaited the old witch's arrival. At last, as it was beginning to grow dark, she appeared. She swooped down upon a big apple tree, and after shaking some golden apples from it, she pounced down upon the earth. As soon as her feet touched the ground, she became transformed from a hawk into a woman. This was the moment the youth was waiting for, and he swung his mighty sword in the air with all his strength, and the witch's head fell off, and her blood spurted up on the walls. Without fear of any further danger, he packed up all the treasures of the castle into great chests, and gave his brothers a signal to pull them up out of the abyss. First, the treasures were attached to the rope, and then the 3 lovely girls. And now everything was up above, and only he himself remained below. But as he was a little suspicious of his brothers, he fastened a heavy stone onto the rope and let them pull it up. At first they heaved with a will, but when the stone was halfway up, they let it drop suddenly, and it fell to the bottom, broken into 100 pieces. "So that's what would have happened to my bones had I trusted myself to them," said the youth sadly, and he began to cry bitterly, not because of the treasures, but because of the lovely girl with her swan-like neck and golden hair. For a long time he wandered sadly all through the beautiful underworld, and one day he met a magician who asked him the cause of his tears. The youth told him all that had befallen him, and the magician said, "Do not grieve, young man. If you will guard the children who are hidden in the golden apple tree, I will bring you at once up to the earth. Another magician who lives in this land always eats my children up. It is in vain that I have hidden them under the earth and locked them into the castle. Now I have hidden them in the apple tree. Hide yourself there too, and at midnight you will see my enemy." The youth climbed up the tree and picked some of the beautiful golden apples which he ate for his supper. At midnight the wind began to rise, and a rustling sound was heard at the foot of the tree. The youth looked down and beheld a long, thick serpent beginning to crawl up the tree. It wound itself round the stem and gradually got higher and higher. It stretched its huge head, in which the eyes glittered fiercely, among the branches, searching for the nest in which the little children lay. They trembled with terror when they saw the hideous creature and hid themselves beneath the leaves. Then the youth swung his mighty sword in the air, and with one blow cut off the serpent's head. He cut up the rest of the body into little bits and strewed them to the 4 winds. The father of the rescued children was so delighted over the death of his enemy that he told the youth to get on his back, and in this way he carried him up to the world above. With what joy did he hurry now to his brother's house! He burst into a room where they were all assembled, but no one knew who he was. Only his bride, who was serving as cook to her sisters, recognized her lover at once. His brothers, who had quite believed he was dead, yielded him up his treasures at once, and flew into the woods in terror. But the good youth forgave them all they had done, and divided his treasures with them. Then he built himself a big castle with golden windows and there he lived happily with his golden-haired wife till the end of their lives. The tinder box. A soldier came marching along the high road, left, right, left, right. He had his knapsack on his back and a sword by his side, for he had been to the wars and was now returning home. An old witch met him on the road. She was very ugly to look at. Her underlip hung down to her breast. "Good evening, soldier," she said. "What a fine sword and knapsack you have. You are something like a soldier. You ought to have as much money as you would like to carry." "Thank you, old witch," said the soldier. "Do you see that great tree there?" said the witch, pointing to a tree beside them. "It is hollow within. You must climb up to the top, and then you will see a hole through which you can let yourself down into the tree. I will tie a rope round your waist, so that I may be able to pull you up again when you call." "What shall I do down there?" asked the soldier. "Get money," answered the witch. "When you reach the bottom of the tree, you will find yourself in a large hall. It is light there, for there are more than 300 lamps burning. Then you will see 3 doors, which you can open. The keys are in the locks. If you go into the first room, you will see a great chest in the middle of the floor with a dog sitting upon it. He has eyes as large as saucers, but you needn't trouble about him. I will give you my blue check apron, which you must spread out on the floor, and then go back quickly and fetch the dog and set him upon it. Open the chest and take as much money as you like. It is copper there. If you would rather have silver, you must go into the next room, where there is a dog with eyes as large as mill wheels. But don't take any notice of him. Just set him upon my apron and help yourself to the money. If you prefer gold, you can get that too, if you go into the third room, and as much as you like to carry. But the dog that guards the chest there has eyes as large as the round tower at Copenhagen. He is a savage dog, I can tell you, but you needn't be afraid of him either. Only put him on my apron, and he won't touch you, and you can take out of the chest as much gold as you like." "Come, this is not bad," said the soldier. "But what am I to give you, old witch? For surely you are not going to do this for nothing?" "Yes, I am," replied the witch. "Not a single farthing will I take. For me you shall bring nothing but an old tinder box, which my grandmother forgot last time she was down there." "Well, tie the rope round my waist," said the soldier. "Here it is," said the witch, "and here is my blue check apron." Then the soldier climbed up the tree, let himself down through the hole, and found himself standing, as the witch had said, underground in the large hall where the 300 lamps were burning. "Well!" He opened the first door. Ugh! There sat the dog, with eyes as big as saucers glaring at him. "You are a fine fellow," said the soldier, and put him on the witch's apron, took as much copper as his pockets could hold. Then he shut the chest, put the dog on it again, and went into the second room. Sure enough, there sat the dog with eyes as large as mill wheels. "You had better not look at me so hard," said the soldier. "Your eyes will come out of their sockets." And then he set the dog on the apron. When he saw all the silver in the chest, he threw away the copper he had taken and filled his pockets and knapsack with nothing but silver. Then he went into the third room. Horrors! The dog there had 2 eyes, each as large as the round tower at Copenhagen, spinning round in his head like wheels. "Good evening," said the soldier, and saluted, for he had never seen a dog like this before. But when he had examined him more closely, he thought to himself, Now then, I've had enough of this," and put him down on the floor and opened the chest. Heavens, what a heap of gold there was! With all that he could buy up the whole town, and all the sugar pigs, all the tin soldiers, whips, and rocking horses in the whole world. Now he threw away all the silver with which he had filled his pockets and knapsack, and filled them with gold instead. Yes, all his pockets, his knapsack, cap and boots even, so that he could hardly walk. Now he was rich indeed. He put the dog back upon the chest, shut the door, and then called up through the tree, "Now pull me up again, old witch." "Have you got the tinder box also?" asked the witch. "Botheration," said the soldier. "I had clean forgotten it." And then he went back and fetched it. The witch pulled him up, and there he stood again on the high road, with pockets, knapsack, cap and boots filled with gold. "What do you want to do with the tinder box?" asked the soldier. "That doesn't matter to you," replied the witch. "You have got your money. Give me my tinder box." "We'll see," said the soldier. "Tell me at once what you want to do with it, or I will draw my sword and cut off your head." "No!" screamed the witch. The soldier immediately cut off her head. That was the end of her. But he tied up all his gold in her apron, slung it like a bundle over his shoulder, put the tinder box in his pocket, and set out towards the town. It was a splendid town. He turned into the finest inn, ordered the best chamber and his favourite dinner, for now that he had so much money, he was really rich. It certainly occurred to the servant, who had to clean his boots, that they were astonishingly old boots for such a rich lord, but that was because he had not yet bought new ones. Next day he appeared in respectable boots and fine clothes. Now, instead of a common soldier, he had become a noble lord, and the people told him about all the grand doings of the town and the king. And what a beautiful princess his daughter was. "How can one get to see her?" asked the soldier. "She is never to be seen at all," they told him. "She lives in a great copper castle, surrounded by many walls and towers. No one except the king may go in or out, for it is prophesied that she will marry a common soldier, and the king cannot submit to that." "I should very much like to see her," thought the soldier, but he could not get permission. Now he lived very gaily, went to the theatre, drove in the king's garden, and gave the poor a great deal of money, which was very nice of him. He had experienced in former times how hard it is not to have a farthing in the world. Now he was rich, wore fine clothes, and made many friends, who all said that he was an excellent man, a real nobleman, and the soldier liked that. But as he was always spending money, and never made any more, at last the day came when he had nothing left but 2 shillings, and he had to leave the beautiful rooms in which he had been living, and go into a little attic under the roof, and clean his own boots, and mend them with a darning needle. None of his friends came to visit him there, for there were too many stairs to climb. It was a dark evening, and he could not even buy a light. But all at once it flashed across him that there was a little end of tinder in the tinder box, which he had taken from the hollow tree into which the witch had helped him down. He found the box with the tinder in it, but just as he was kindling a light, and had struck a spark out of the tinder box, the door burst open, and the dog with eyes as large as saucers, which he had seen down in the tree, stood before him and said, "What does my lord command?" "What's the meaning of this?" exclaimed the soldier. "This is a pretty kind of tinder box, if I can get whatever I want like this." "Get me money," he cried to the dog, and hey presto, he was off and back again, holding a great purse full of money in his mouth. Now the soldier knew what a capital tinder box this was. If he rubbed once, the dog that sat on the chest of copper appeared. If he rubbed twice, there came the dog that watched over the silver chest. And if he rubbed 3 times, the one that guarded the gold appeared. Now the soldier went down again to his beautiful rooms and appeared once more in splendid clothes. All his friends immediately recognized him again, and paid him great court. One day he thought to himself, "It is very strange that no one can get to see the princess. They all say she is very pretty. But what's the use of that if she has to sit forever in the great copper castle with all the towers? Can I not manage to see her somehow? Where is my tinder box?" And so he struck a spark, and presto! There came the dog with eyes as large as saucers. "It is the middle of the night." "I know," said the soldier, "but I should very much like to see the princess for a moment." The dog was already outside the door, and before the soldier could look round, in he came with the princess. She was lying asleep on the dog's back, and was so beautiful that anyone could see she was a real princess. The soldier really could not refrain from kissing her. He was such a thorough soldier. Then the dog ran back with the princess. But when it was morning, and the king and queen were drinking tea, the princess said that the night before she had had such a strange dream about a dog and a soldier. She had ridden on the dog's back, and the soldier had kissed her. "That is certainly a fine story," said the queen. But the next night one of the ladies in waiting was to watch at the princess's bed, to see if it was only a dream, or if it had actually happened. The soldier had an overpowering longing to see the princess again, and so the dog came in the middle of the night and fetched her, running as fast as he could. But the lady in waiting slipped on india-rubber shoes and followed them. When she saw them disappear into a large house, she thought to herself, "Now I know where it is," and made a great cross on the door with a piece of chalk. Then she went home and lay down, and the dog came back also, with the princess. But when he saw that a cross had been made on the door of the house where the soldier lived, he took a piece of chalk also, and made crosses on all the doors in the town, and that was very clever, for now the lady in waiting could not find the right house, as there were crosses on all the doors. Early next morning, the king, queen, ladies in waiting, and officers came out to see where the princess had been. "There it is," said the king, when he saw the first door with a cross on it. "No, there it is, my dear," said the queen, when she likewise saw a door with a cross. "But here is one, and there is another," they all exclaimed. Wherever they looked, there was a cross on the door. Then they realized that the sign would not help them at all. But the queen was an extremely clever woman, who could do a great deal more than just drive in a coach. She took her great golden scissors, cut up a piece of silk, and made a pretty little bag of it. This she filled with the finest buckwheat grains and tied it round the princess's neck. This done, she cut a little hole in the bag so that the grains would strew the whole road wherever the princess went. In the night, the dog came again, took the princess on his back, and ran away with her to the soldier, who was very much in love with her, and would have liked to have been a prince, so that he might have had her for his wife. The dog did not notice how the grains were strewn right from the castle to the soldier's window, where he ran up the wall with the princess. In the morning, the king and the queen saw plainly where their daughter had been, and they took the soldier and put him into prison. There he sat. Oh, how dark and dull it was there! And they told him, "Tomorrow you are to be hanged." Hearing that did not exactly cheer him, and he had left his tinder box in the inn. Next morning he could see through the iron grating in front of his little window how the people were hurrying out of the town to see him hanged. He heard the drums and saw the soldiers marching. All the people were running to and fro. Just below his window was a shoemaker's apprentice with leather apron and shoes. He was skipping along so merrily that one of his shoes flew off and fell against the wall, just where the soldier was sitting, peeping through the iron grating. "Oh, shoemaker's boy, you needn't be in such a hurry," said the soldier to him. "There's nothing going on till I arrive. But if you will run back to the house where I lived, and fetch me my tinder box, I will give you 4 shillings. But you must put your best foot foremost." the shoemaker's boy was very willing to earn 4 shillings, and fetched the tinder-box, gave it to the soldier, and, "Yes, now you shall hear." Outside the town, a great scaffold had been erected, and all round were standing the soldiers, and hundreds of thousands of people. The king and queen were sitting on a magnificent throne, opposite the judges and the whole council. The soldier was already standing on the top of the ladder, but when they wanted to put the rope round his neck, he said that the fulfillment of one innocent request was always granted to a poor criminal before he underwent his punishment. He would so much like to smoke a small pipe of tobacco, it would be his last pipe in this world. The king could not refuse him this, and so he took out his tinder-box and rubbed it once, twice, 3 times. And lo, and behold, there stood all 3 dogs, the one with eyes as large as saucers, the second with eyes as large as mill wheels, and the third with eyes each as large as the round tower of Copenhagen. "Help me now, so that I may not be hanged," cried the soldier. And thereupon the dogs fell upon the judges, and the whole council seized some by the legs, others by the nose, and threw them so high into the air that they fell and were smashed into pieces. "I won't stand this," said the king, but the largest dog seized him too, and the queen as well, and threw them up after the others. This frightened the soldiers, and all the people cried, "Good soldier, you shall be our king, and marry the beautiful princess." Then they put the soldier into the king's coach, and the 3 dogs danced in front, crying, "Hurrah!" And the boys whistled, and the soldiers presented arms. The princess came out of the copper castle and became queen, and that pleased her very much. The wedding festivities lasted for 8 days, and the dogs sat at table and made eyes at everyone. The White Duck. Once upon a time, a great and powerful king married a lovely princess. No couple were ever so happy, but before their honeymoon was over, they were forced to part, for the king had to go on a warlike expedition to a far country, and leave his young wife alone at home. Bitter were the tears she shed, while her husband sought in vain to soothe her with words of comfort and counsel, warning her, above all things, never to leave the castle, to hold no intercourse with strangers, to beware of evil counselors, and especially to be on her guard against strange women. And the queen promised faithfully to obey her royal lord and master in these 4 matters. So when the king set out on his expedition, she shut herself up with her ladies in her own apartments, and spent her time in spinning and weaving, and in thinking of her royal husband. Often she was very sad and lonely, and it happened that one day, while she was seated at the window, letting salt tears drop on her work, an old woman, a kind, homely-looking old body, stepped up to the window, and, leaning upon her crutch, addressed the queen in friendly, flattering tones, saying, "Why are you sad and cast down, fair queen? You should not mope all day in your rooms, but should come out into the green garden, and hear the birds sing with joy among the trees, and see the butterflies fluttering above the flowers, and hear the bees and insects hum, and watch the sunbeams chase the dewdrops through the rose leaves and in the lily cups. All the brightness outside would help to drive away your cares, O queen." For long the queen resisted her coaxing words, remembering the promise she had given the king, her husband. But at last she thought to herself, "After all, what harm would it do if I were to go into the garden for a short time and enjoy myself among the trees and flowers, and the singing birds and fluttering butterflies and humming insects, and look at the dewdrops hiding from the sunbeams in the hearts of the roses and lilies, and wander about in the sunshine, instead of remaining all day in this room?" For she had no idea that the kind-looking old woman leaning on her crutch was in reality a wicked witch who envied the queen her good fortune and was determined to ruin her. And so, in all ignorance, the queen followed her out into the garden and listened to her smooth, flattering words. Now, in the middle of the garden there was a pond of water, clear as crystal, and the old woman said to the queen, "The day is so warm, and the sun's rays so scorching, that the water in the pond looks very cool and inviting. Would you not like to bathe in it, fair queen?" "No, I think not," answered the queen. But the next moment she regretted her words and thought to herself, "Why shouldn't I bathe in that cool, fresh water? No harm could come of it." And, so saying, she slipped off her robes and stepped into the water. But scarcely had her tender feet touched the cool ripples when she felt a great shove on her shoulders, and the wicked witch had pushed her into the deep water, exclaiming, "Swim henceforth, white duck." And the witch herself assumed the form of the queen, and decked herself out in the royal robes, and sat among the court ladies, awaiting the king's return. And suddenly the tramp of horses' hoofs was heard, and the barking of dogs, and the witch hastened forward to meet the royal carriages, and, throwing her arms round the king's neck, kissed him. And in his great joy, the king did not know that the woman he held in his arms was not his own dear wife, but a wicked witch. In the meantime, outside the palace walls, the poor white duck swam up and down the pond, and near it laid 3 eggs, out of which there came one morning 2 little fluffy ducklings and a little ugly drake. And the white duck brought the little creatures up, and they paddled after her in the pond, and caught goldfish, and hopped upon the bank, and waddled about, ruffling their feathers, and saying, "Quack, quack," as they strutted about on the green banks of the pond. But their mother used to warn them not to stray too far, telling them that a wicked witch lived in the castle beyond the garden, adding, "She has ruined me, and she will do her best to ruin you." But the young ones did not listen to their mother, and, playing about the garden one day, they strayed close up to the castle windows. The witch at once recognized them by their smell, and ground her teeth with anger, but she hid her feelings, and, pretending to be very kind, she called them to her, and joked with them, and led them into a beautiful room, where she gave them food to eat, and showed them a soft cushion on which they might sleep. Then she left them, and went down into the palace kitchens, where she told the servants to sharpen the knives, and to make a great fire ready, and hang a large kettle full of water over it. In the meantime, the 2 little ducklings had fallen asleep, and the little drake lay between them, covered up by their wings, to be kept warm under their feathers. But the little drake could not go to sleep, and as he lay there wide awake in the night, he heard the witch come to the door and say, "Little ones, are you asleep?" And the little drake answered for the other 2, "We cannot sleep, we wake and weep. Sharp is the knife to take our life. The fire is hot, now boils the pot. And so we wake and lie and quake." "They are not asleep yet," muttered the witch to herself, and she walked up and down in the passage, and then came back to the door and said, "Little ones, are you asleep?" And again the little drake answered for his sisters, "We cannot sleep, we wake and weep. Sharp is the knife to take our life. The fire is hot, now boils the pot. And so we wake and lie and quake." "Just the same answer," muttered the witch. "I think I'll go in and see." So she opened the door gently, and seeing the 2 little ducklings sound asleep, she there and then killed them. The next morning the white duck wandered round the pond in a distracted manner, looking for her little ones. She called and she searched, but could find no trace of them. And in her heart she had a foreboding that evil had befallen them, and she fluttered up out of the water and flew to the palace. And there, Laid out on the marble floor of the court, dead and stone cold, were her 3 children. The white duck threw herself upon them, and, covering up their little bodies with her wings, she cried, "Quack, quack, my little loves! Quack, quack, my turtle doves! I brought you up with grief and pain, and now before my eyes you're slain. I gave you always of the best, I kept you warm in my soft nest. I loved and watched you day and night. You were my joy, my one delight." The king heard the sad complaint of the white duck, and called to the witch, "Wife, what a wonder is this! Listen to that white duck." But the witch answered, "My dear husband, what do you mean? There is nothing wonderful in a duck's quacking. Here, servants, chase that duck out of the courtyard." But though the servants chased and chevied, they could not get rid of the duck, for she circled round and always came back to the spot where her children lay, crying, "Quack, quack, my little loves! Quack, quack, my turtle doves! The wicked witch your lives did take, the wicked witch, the cunning snake. First she stole my king away, then my children did she slay, changed me from a happy wife to a duck for all my life. Would I were the queen again, would that you had never been slain." And as the king heard her words, he began to suspect that he had been deceived, and he called out to the servants, "Catch that duck and bring it here." But, though they ran to and fro, the duck always fled past them, and would not let herself be caught. So the king himself stepped down amongst them, and instantly the duck fluttered down into his hands. And as he stroked her wings, she was changed into a beautiful woman, and he recognized his dear wife. And she told him that a bottle would be found in her nest in the garden, containing some drops from the spring of healing. And it was brought to her, and the ducklings and little drake were sprinkled with the water, and from the little dead bodies 3 lovely children arose. And the king and queen were overjoyed when they saw their children, and they all lived happily together in the beautiful palace. But the wicked witch was taken by the king's command, and she came to no good end. The Witch in the Stone Boat. There were once a king and a queen, and they had a son called Sigurd, who was very strong and active and good-looking. When the king came to be bowed down with the weight of years, he spoke to his son, and said that now it was time for him to look out for a fitting match for himself, for he did not know how long he might last now, and he would like to see him married before he died. Sigurd was not averse to this, and asked his father where he thought it best to look for a wife. The king answered that in a certain country there was a king who had a beautiful daughter, and he thought it would be most desirable if Sigurd could get her. So the two parted, and Sigurd prepared for the journey and went to where his father had directed him. He came to the king and asked his daughter's hand, which he readily granted him, but only on the condition that he should remain there as long as he could, for the king himself was not strong and not very able to govern his kingdom. Sigurd accepted this condition, but added that he would have to get leave to go home again to his own country when he heard news of his father's death. After that, Sigurd married the princess, and helped his father-in-law to govern the kingdom. He and the princess loved each other dearly, and after a year a son came to them, who was 2 years old when word came to Sigurd that his father was dead. Sigurd now prepared to return home with his wife and child, and went on board ship to go by sea. They had sailed for several days when the breeze suddenly fell, and there came a dead calm at a time when they needed only 1 day's voyage to reach home. Sigurd and his queen were 1 day on deck, when most of the others on the ship had fallen asleep. There they sat and talked for a while, and had their little son along with them. After a time, Sigurd became so heavy with sleep that he could no longer keep awake, so he went below and lay down, leaving the queen alone on the deck, playing with her son. A good while after Sigurd had gone below, the queen saw something black on the sea, which seemed to be coming nearer. As it approached, she could make out that it was a boat, and could see the figure of someone sitting in it and rowing it. At last the boat came alongside the ship, and now the queen saw that it was a stone boat, out of which there came up on board the ship a fearfully ugly witch. The queen was more frightened than words can describe, and could neither speak a word nor move from the place so as to awaken the king or the sailors. The witch came right up to the queen, took the child from her, and laid it on the deck. Then she took the queen, and stripped her of all her fine clothes, which she proceeded to put on herself, and looked then like a human being. Last of all she took the queen, put her into the boat, and said, "This spell I lay upon you, that you slacken not your course until you come to my brother in the underworld." The queen sat stunned and motionless, but the boat at once shot away from the ship with her, and before long she was out of sight. When the boat could no longer be seen, the child began to cry, and though the witch tried to quiet it, she could not manage it. So she went below to where the king was sleeping with the child on her arm, and awakened him, scolding him for leaving them alone on deck, while he and all the crew were asleep. It was great carelessness of him, she said, to leave no one to watch the ship with her. Sigurd was greatly surprised to hear his queen scold him so much, for she had never said an angry word to him before, but he thought it was quite excusable in this case, and tried to quiet the child along with her, but it was no use. Then he went and wakened the sailors, and bade them hoist the sails, for a breeze had sprung up and was blowing straight towards the harbour. They soon reached the land which Sigurd was to rule over, and found all the people sorrowful for the old king's death, but they became glad when they got Sigurd back to the court and made him king over them. The king's son, however, hardly ever stopped crying from the time he had been taken from his mother on the deck of the ship, although he had always been such a good child before, so that at last the king had to get a nurse for him, one of the maids of the court. As soon as the child got into her charge, he stopped crying, and behaved well as before. After the sea voyage, it seemed to the king that the queen had altered very much in many ways, and not for the better. He thought her much more haughty and stubborn and difficult to deal with than she used to be. Before long, others began to notice this as well as the king. In the court there were two young fellows, one of 18 years old, the other of 19, who were very fond of playing chess, and often sat long inside playing at it. Their room was next, the queen's, and often during the day they heard the queen talking. One day they paid more attention than usual when they heard her talk, and put their ears close to a crack in the wall between the rooms, and heard the queen say quite plainly, "When I yawn a little, then I am a nice little maiden. When I yawn halfway, then I am half a troll. And when I yawn fully, then I am a troll altogether." As she said this, she yawned tremendously, and in a moment had put on the appearance of a fearfully ugly troll. Then there came up through the floor of the room a three-headed giant with a trough full of meat, who saluted her as his sister, and set down the trough before her. She began to eat out of it, and never stopped till she had finished it. The young fellows saw all this going on, but did not hear the two of them say anything to each other. They were astonished, though, at how greedily the queen devoured the meat, and how much she ate of it, and were no longer surprised that she took so little when she sat at table with the king. As soon as she had finished it, the giant disappeared with the trough by the same way as he had come, and the queen returned to her human shape. Now we must go back to the king's son after he had been put in charge of the nurse. One evening, after she had lit a candle and was holding the child, several planks sprang up in the floor of the room, and out at the opening came a beautiful woman dressed in white with an iron belt round her waist. to which was fastened an iron chain that went down into the ground. The woman came up to the nurse, took the child from her, and pressed it to her breast. Then she gave it back to the nurse, and returned by the same way as she had come, and the floor closed over her again. Although the woman had not spoken a single word to her, the nurse was very much frightened, but told no one about it. Next evening, the same thing happened again, just as before. But as the woman was going away, she said in a sad tone, "Two are gone, and one only is left," and then disappeared as before. The nurse was still more frightened when she heard the woman say this, and thought that perhaps some danger was hanging over the child, though she had no ill opinion of the unknown woman, who, indeed, had behaved towards the child as if it were her own. The most mysterious thing was the woman saying, "And only one is left," but the nurse guessed that this must mean that only 1 day was left, since she had come for 2 days already. At last the nurse made up her mind to go to the king and told him the whole story, and asked him to be present in person next day about the time when the woman usually came. The king promised to do so, and came to the nurse's room a little before the time, and sat down on a chair with his drawn sword in his hand. Soon after, the planks in the floor sprang up as before, and the woman came up, dressed in white with the iron belt and chain. The king saw at once that it was his own queen, and immediately hewed asunder the iron chain that was fastened to the belt. This was followed by such noises and crashings down in the earth that all the king's palace shook, so that no one expected anything else than to see every bit of it shaken to pieces. At last, however, the noises and shaking stopped, and they began to come to themselves again. The king and queen embraced each other, and she told him the whole story, how the witch came to the ship when they were all asleep and sent her off in the boat. After she had gone so far that she could not see the ship, she sailed on through darkness until she landed beside a 3-headed giant. The giant wished her to marry him, but she refused, whereupon he shut her up by herself and told her she would never get free until she consented. After a time, she began to plan how to get her freedom, and at last told him that she would consent if he would allow her to visit her son on earth 3 days on end. This he agreed to, but put on her this iron belt and chain, the other end of which he fastened round his own waist, and the great noises that were heard when the king cut the chain must have been caused by the giant's falling down the underground passage when the chain gave way so suddenly. The giant's dwelling, indeed, was right under the palace, and the terrible shakings must have been caused by him in his death throes. The king now understood how the queen he had had for some time past had been so ill-tempered. He at once had a sack drawn over her head and made her be stoned to death, and after that torn in pieces by untamed horses. The 2 young fellows also told now what they had heard and seen in the queen's room, for before this they had been afraid to say anything about it, on account of the queen's power. The real queen was now restored to all her dignity, and was beloved by all. The nurse was married to a nobleman, and the king and queen gave her splendid presents. The Witch. Once upon a time there was a peasant whose wife died, leaving him with 2 children, twins, a boy and a girl. For some years the poor man lived on alone with the children, caring for them as best he could. But everything in the house seemed to go wrong without a woman to look after it, and at last he made up his mind to marry again, feeling that a wife would bring peace and order to his household and take care of his motherless children. So he married, and in the following years several children were born to him, but peace and order did not come to the household. For the stepmother was very cruel to the twins, and beat them, and half-starved them, and constantly drove them out of the house. For her one idea was to get them out of the way. All day she thought of nothing but how she should get rid of them, and at last an evil idea came into her head, and she determined to send them out into the great gloomy wood where a wicked witch lived. And so one morning she spoke to them, saying, "You have been such good children that I am going to send you to visit my granny, who lives in a dear little hut in the wood. You will have to wait upon her and serve her, but you will be well rewarded, for she will give you the best of everything." So the children left the house together, and the little sister, who was very wise for her years, said to the brother, "We will first go and see our own dear grandmother, and tell her where our stepmother is sending us." And when the grandmother heard where they were going, she cried and said, "You poor, motherless children! How I pity you, and yet I can do nothing to help you. Your stepmother is not sending you to her granny, but to a wicked witch who lives in that great gloomy wood. Now listen to me, children. You must be civil and kind to everyone, and never say a cross word to anyone, and never touch a crumb belonging to anyone else. Who knows if, after all, help may not be sent to you?" And she gave her grandchildren a bottle of milk and a piece of ham and a loaf of bread, and they set out for the great gloomy wood. When they reached it, they saw in front of them, in the thickest of the trees, a queer little hut, and when they looked into it, there lay the witch, with her head on the threshold of the door, with one foot in one corner and the other in the other corner, and her knees cocked up, almost touching the ceiling. "Who's there?" she snarled in an awful voice when she saw the children. And they answered civilly, though they were so terrified that they hid behind one another and said, "Good morning, Granny. Our stepmother has sent us to wait upon you and serve you." "See that you do it well, then," growled the witch. "If I am pleased with you, I'll reward you, but if I am not, I'll put you in a pan and fry you in the oven." "That's what I'll do with you, my pretty dears. You have been gently reared, but you'll find my work hard enough. See if you don't." And, so saying, she set the girl down to spin yarn, and she gave the boy a sieve in which to carry water from the well, and she herself went out into the wood. Now, as the girl was sitting at her distaff, weeping bitterly because she could not spin, she heard the sound of hundreds of little feet, and from every hole and corner in the hut mice came pattering along the floor, squeaking and saying, "Little girl, why are your eyes so red? If you want help, then give us some bread." And the girl gave them the bread that her grandmother had given her. Then the mice told her that the witch had a cat, and the cat was very fond of ham. If she would give the cat her ham, it would show her the way out of the wood, and in the meantime they would spin the yarn for her. So the girl set out to look for the cat, and, as she was hunting about, she met her brother in great trouble because he could not carry water from the well in a sieve, as it came pouring out as fast as he put it in. And as she was trying to comfort him, they heard a rustling of wings, and a flight of wrens alighted on the ground beside them. And the wrens said, "Give us some crumbs, then you need not grieve, for you'll find that water will stay in the sieve." Then the twins crumbled their bread on the ground, and the wrens pecked it, and chirruped and chirped. And when they had eaten the last crumb, they told the boy to fill up the holes of the sieve with clay, and then to draw water from the well. So he did what they said, and carried the sieve full of water into the hut without spilling a drop. When they entered the hut, the cat was curled up on the floor. So they stroked her, and fed her with ham, and said to her, "Pussy, Grey Pussy, tell us how we are to get away from the witch." Then the cat thanked them for the ham, and gave them a pocket handkerchief and a comb, and told them that when the witch pursued them, as she certainly would, all they had to do was to throw the handkerchief on the ground and run as fast as they could. As soon as the handkerchief touched the ground, a deep broad river would spring up, which would hinder the witch's progress. If she managed to get across it, they must throw the comb behind them and run for their lives. For where the comb fell, a dense forest would start up, which would delay the witch so long that they would be able to get safely away. The cat had scarcely finished speaking when the witch returned to see if the children had fulfilled their tasks. "Well, you have done well enough for today," she grumbled. "But tomorrow you'll have something more difficult to do, and if you don't do it well, you pampered brats, straight into the oven you go." Half dead with fright, and trembling in every limb, the poor children lay down to sleep on a heap of straw in the corner of the hut. But they dared not close their eyes, and scarcely ventured to breathe. In the morning, the witch gave the girl 2 pieces of linen to weave before night, and the boy a pile of wood to cut into chips. Then the witch left them to their tasks and went out into the wood. As soon as she had gone out of sight, the children took the comb and the handkerchief, and, taking one another by the hand, they started and ran and ran and ran. And first they met the watchdog, who was going to leap on them and tear them to pieces, but they threw the remains of their bread to him, and he ate them and wagged his tail. Then they were hindered by the birch trees, whose branches almost put their eyes out. But the little sister tied the twigs together with a piece of ribbon, and they got past safely, and, after running through the wood, came out onto the open fields. In the meantime, in the hut, the cat was busy weaving the linen and tangling the threads as it wove, and the witch returned to see how the children were getting on, and she crept up to the window and whispered, "Are you weaving, my little dear?" "Yes, Granny, I am weaving," answered the cat. When the witch saw that the children had escaped her, she was furious, and, hitting the cat with the porringer, she said, "Why did you let the children leave the hut? Why did you not scratch their eyes out?" But the cat curled up its tail and put its back up, and answered, "I have served you all these years, and you never even threw me a bone. But the dear children gave me their own piece of ham." Then the witch was furious with the watchdog and with the birch trees, because they had let the children pass. But the dog answered, "I have served you all these years, and you never gave me so much as a hard crust. But the dear children gave me their own loaf of bread." And the birch rustled its leaves and said, "I have served you longer than I can say, and you never tied a bit of twine even round my branches, and the dear children bound them up with their brightest ribbons." So the witch saw there was no help to be got from her old servants, and that the best thing she could do was to mount on her broom and set off in pursuit of the children. And as the children ran, they heard the sound of the broom sweeping the ground close behind them. So instantly they threw the handkerchief down over their shoulder, and in a moment a deep, broad river flowed behind them. When the witch came up to it, it took her a long time before she found a place which she could ford over on her broomstick. But at last she got across, and continued the chase faster than before. And as the children ran, they heard a sound, and the little sister put her ear to the ground and heard the broom sweeping the earth close behind them. So, quick as thought, she threw the comb down on the ground, and in an instant, as the cat had said, a dense forest sprung up, in which the roots and branches were so closely intertwined that it was impossible to force a way through it. So when the witch came up to it on her broom, she found that there was nothing for it but to turn round and go back to her hut. But the twins ran straight on till they reached their own home. Then they told their father all that they had suffered, and he was so angry with their stepmother that he drove her out of the house and never let her return. But he and the children lived happily together, and he took care of them himself, and never let a stranger come near them. The Wizard King. In very ancient times there lived a king whose power lay not only in the vast extent of his dominions, but also in the magic secrets of which he was master. After spending the greater part of his early youth in pleasure, he met a princess of such remarkable beauty that he at once asked her hand in marriage, and, having obtained it, considered himself the happiest of men. After a year's time, a son was born, worthy in every way of such distinguished parents, and much admired by the whole court. As soon as the queen thought him strong enough for a journey, she set out with him secretly to visit her fairy godmother. I said secretly, because the fairy had warned the queen that the king was a magician, and as from time immemorial there had been a standing feud between the fairies and the wizards, he might not have approved of his wife's visit. The fairy godmother, who took the deepest interest in all the queen's concerns, and who was much pleased with the little prince, endowed him with the power of pleasing everybody from his cradle, as well as with a wonderful ease in learning everything which could help to make him a perfectly accomplished prince. Accordingly, to the delight of his teachers, he made the most rapid progress in his education, constantly surpassing everyone's expectations. Before he was many years old, however, he had the great sorrow of losing his mother, whose last words were to advise him never to undertake anything of importance without consulting the fairy under whose protection she had placed him. The prince's grief at the death of his mother was great, but it was nothing compared to that of the king, his father, who was quite inconsolable for the loss of his dear wife. Neither time nor reason seemed to lighten his sorrow, and the sight of all the familiar faces and things about him only served to remind him of his loss. He therefore resolved to travel for change, and by means of his magic art was able to visit every country he came to see under different shapes, returning every few weeks to the place where he had left a few followers. Having travelled from land to land in this fashion without finding anything to rivet his attention, it occurred to him to take the form of an eagle, and in this shape he flew across many countries and arrived at length in a new and lovely spot, where the air seemed filled with the scent of jessamine and orange flowers, with which the ground was thickly planted. Attracted by the sweet perfume, he flew lower, and perceived some large and beautiful gardens filled with the rarest flowers, and with fountains throwing up their clear waters into the air in 100 different shapes. A wide stream flowed through the garden, and on it floated richly ornamented barges and gondolas filled with people dressed in the most elegant manner and covered with jewels. In one of these barges sat the queen of that country with her only daughter, a maiden more beautiful than the day-star, and attended by the ladies of the court. No more exquisitely lovely mortal was ever seen than this princess, and it needed all an eagle's strength of sight to prevent the king being hopelessly dazzled. He perched on the top of a large orange tree, whence he was able to survey the scene, and to gaze at pleasure on the princess's charms. Now, an eagle with a king's heart in his breast is apt to be bold, and accordingly he instantly made up his mind to carry off the lovely damsel, feeling sure that having once seen her, he could not live without her. He waited till he saw her in the act of stepping ashore, when, suddenly swooping down, he carried her off before her equerry in attendance had advanced to offer her his hand. The princess, on finding herself in an eagle's talons, uttered the most heart-breaking shrieks and cries. But her captor, though touched by her distress, would not abandon his lovely prey, and continued to fly through the air too fast to allow of his saying anything to comfort her. At length, when he thought they had reached a safe distance, he began to lower his flight, and gradually descending to earth, deposited his burden in a flowery meadow. He then entreated her pardon for his violence, and told her that he was about to carry her to a great kingdom over which he ruled, and where he desired she should rule with him, adding many tender and consoling expressions. For some time the princess remained speechless, but recovering herself a little, she burst into a flood of tears. The king, much moved, said, "Adorable princess, dry your tears, I implore you. My only wish is to make you the happiest person in the world." "If you speak truth, my lord," replied the princess, "restore to me the liberty you have deprived me of. Otherwise, I can only look on you as my worst enemy." The king retorted that her opposition filled him with despair, but that he hoped to carry her to a place where all around would respect her, and where every pleasure would surround her. So saying, he seized her once more, and in spite of all her cries, he rapidly bore her off to the neighborhood of his capital. Here he gently placed her on a lawn, and as he did so, she saw a magnificent palace spring up at her feet. The architecture was imposing, and in the interior the rooms were handsome and furnished in the best possible taste. The princess, who expected to be quite alone, was pleased at finding herself surrounded by a number of pretty girls, all anxious to wait on her, whilst a brilliantly coloured parrot said the most agreeable things in the world. On arriving at this palace, the king had resumed his own form, and though no longer young, he might well have pleased any other than this princess, who had been so prejudiced against him by his violence that she could only regard him with feelings of hatred which she was at no pains to conceal. The king hoped, however, that time might not only soften her anger, but accustom her to his sight. He took the precaution of surrounding the palace with a dense cloud, and then hastened to his court, where his prolonged absence was causing much anxiety. The prince and all the courtiers were delighted to see their beloved king again, but they had to submit themselves to more frequent absences than ever on his part. He made business a pretext for shutting himself up in his study, but it was really in order to spend the time with the princess, who remained inflexible, not being able to imagine what could be the cause of so much obstinacy. The king began to fear lest, in spite of all his precautions, she might have heard of the charms of the prince, his son, whose goodness, youth, and beauty made him adored at court. This idea made him horribly uneasy, and he resolved to remove the cause of his fears by sending the prince on his travels escorted by a magnificent retinue. The prince, after visiting several courts, arrived at the one where the lost princess was still deeply mourned. The king and queen received him most graciously, and some festivities were revived to do him honour. One day, when the prince was visiting the queen in her own apartments, he was much struck by a most beautiful portrait. He eagerly inquired whose it was, and the queen, with many tears, told him it was all that was left her of her beloved daughter, who had suddenly been carried off, she knew neither where nor how. The prince was deeply moved, and vowed that he would search the world for the princess and take no rest till he had found and restored her to her mother's arms. The queen assured him of her eternal gratitude, and promised, should he succeed, to give him her daughter in marriage, together with all the estates she herself owned. The prince, far more attracted by the thoughts of possessing the princess than her promised dower, set forth in his quest after taking leave of the king and queen, the latter giving him a miniature of her daughter which she was in the habit of wearing. His first act was to seek the fairy under whose protection he had been placed, and he implored her to give him all the assistance of her art and counsel in this important matter. After listening attentively to the whole adventure, the fairy asked for time to consult her books. After due consideration, she informed the prince that the object of his search was not far distant, but that it was too difficult for him to attempt to enter the enchanted palace where she was, as the king his father had surrounded it with a thick cloud, and that the only expedient she could think of would be to gain possession of the princess's parrot. This, she added, did not appear impossible, as it often flew about to some distance in the neighbourhood. Having told the prince all this, the fairy went out in hopes of seeing the parrot, and soon returned with the bird in her hand. She promptly shut it up in a cage and, touching the prince with her wand, transformed him into an exactly similar parrot, after which she instructed him how to reach the princess. The prince reached the palace in safety, but was so dazzled at first by the princess's beauty, which far surpassed his expectations, that he was quite dumb for a time. The princess was surprised and anxious, and fearing the parrot, who was her greatest comfort, had fallen ill. She took him in her hand and caressed him. This soon reassured the prince and encouraged him to play his part well, and he began to say 1,000 agreeable things which charmed the princess. Presently the king appeared, and the parrot noticed with joy how much he was disliked. As soon as the king left, the princess retired to her dressing-room. The parrot flew after her and overheard her lamentations at the continued persecutions of the king, who had pressed her to consent to their marriage. The parrot said so many clever and tender things to comfort her that she began to doubt whether this could indeed be her own parrot. When he saw her well disposed towards him, he exclaimed, "Madam, I have a most important secret to confide to you, and I beg you not to be alarmed by what I am about to say. I am here on behalf of the Queen, your mother, with the object of delivering your Highness, to prove which, behold this portrait which she gave me herself." So saying, he drew forth the miniature from under his wing. The princess's surprise was great, but after what she had seen and heard, it was impossible not to indulge in hope, for she had recognized the likeness of herself which her mother always wore. The parrot, finding she was not much alarmed, told her who he was, all that her mother had promised him, and the help he had already received from a fairy, who had assured him that she would give him means to transport the princess to her mother's arms. When he found her listening attentively to him, he implored the princess to allow him to resume his natural shape. She did not speak, so he drew a feather from his wing, and she beheld before her a prince of such surpassing beauty that it was impossible not to hope that she might owe her liberty to so charming a person. Meantime the fairy had prepared a chariot, to which she harnessed 2 powerful eagles. Then, placing the cage with the parrot in it, she charged the bird to conduct it to the window of the princess's dressing-room. This was done in a few minutes, and the princess, stepping into the chariot with the prince, was delighted to find her parrot again. As they rose through the air, the princess remarked, "A figure mounted on an eagle's back flying in front of the chariot." She was rather alarmed, but the prince reassured her, telling her it was the good fairy to whom she owed so much, and who was now conducting her in safety to her mother. That same morning, the king woke suddenly from a troubled sleep. He had dreamt that the princess was being carried off from him, and, transforming himself into an eagle, he flew to the palace. When he failed to find her, he flew into a terrible rage and hastened home to consult his books, by which means he discovered that it was his son who had deprived him of this precious treasure. Immediately he took the shape of a harpy, and, filled with rage, was determined to devour his son, and even the princess too, if only he could overtake them. He set out at full speed, but he started too late, and was further delayed by a strong wind which the fairy raised behind the young couple so as to baffle any pursuit. You may imagine the rapture with which the queen received the daughter she had given up for lost, as well as the amiable prince who had rescued her. The fairy entered with them and warned the queen that the wizard king would shortly arrive, infuriated by his loss, and that nothing could preserve the prince and princess from his rage and magic unless they were actually married. The queen hastened to inform the king her husband, and the wedding took place on the spot. As the ceremony was completed, the wizard king arrived. His despair at being so late bewildered him so entirely that he appeared in his natural form and attempted to sprinkle some black liquid over the bride and bridegroom, which was intended to kill them, But the fairy stretched out her wand, and the liquid dropped on the magician himself. He fell down senseless, and the princess's father, deeply offended at the cruel revenge which had been attempted, ordered him to be removed and locked up in prison. Now, as magicians lose all their power as soon as they are in prison, the king felt himself much embarrassed at being thus at the mercy of those he had so greatly offended. The prince implored and obtained his father's pardon, and the prison doors were opened. No sooner was this done than the wizard king was seen in the air under the form of some unknown bird, exclaiming as he flew off that he would never forgive either his son or the fairy. The cruel wrong they had done him. Everyone entreated the fairy to settle in the kingdom where she now was, to which she consented. She built herself a magnificent palace, to which she transported her books and fairy secrets, and where she enjoyed the sight of the perfect happiness she had helped to bestow on the entire royal family. Thumbelina. There was once a woman who wanted to have quite a tiny little child, but she did not know where to get one from. So one day she went to an old witch and said to her, "I should so much like to have a tiny little child. Can you tell me where I can get one?" "Oh, we have just got one ready," said the witch. "Here is a barleycorn for you. But it's not the kind the farmer sows in his field, or feeds the cocks and hens with, I can tell you. Put it in a flower pot, and then you will see something happen." "Oh, thank you," said the woman, and gave the witch a shilling, for that was what it cost. Then she went home and planted the barleycorn. Immediately there grew out of it a large and beautiful flower, which looked like a tulip, but the petals were tightly closed as if it were still only a bud. "What a beautiful flower!" exclaimed the woman, and she kissed the red and yellow petals. But as she kissed them, the flower burst open. It was a real tulip, such as one can see any day, but in the middle of the blossom, on the green velvety petals, sat a little girl, quite tiny, trim, and pretty. She was scarcely half a thumb in height, so they called her Thumbelina. An elegant polished walnut shell served Thumbelina as a cradle. The blue petals of a violet were her mattress, and a rose leaf her coverlid. There she lay at night, but in the daytime she used to play about on the table. Here the woman had put a bowl, surrounded by a ring of flowers, with their stalks in water, in the middle of which floated a great tulip petal. And on this Thumbelina sat and sailed from one side of the bowl to the other, rowing herself with 2 white horsehairs for oars. It was such a pretty sight. She could sing too, with a voice more soft and sweet than had ever been heard before. One night, when she was lying in her pretty little bed, an old toad crept in through a broken pane in the window. She was very ugly, clumsy, and clammy. She hopped onto the table where Thumbelina lay asleep under the red rose leaf. "This would make a beautiful wife for my son," said the toad, taking up the walnut shell, with Thumbelina inside and hopping with it through the window into the garden. There flowed a great wide stream with slippery and marshy banks. Here the toad lived with her son. Ugh! How ugly and clammy he was, just like his mother. "Croak, croak, croak," was all he could say when he saw the pretty little girl in the walnut shell. "Don't talk so loud, or you'll wake her," said the old toad. "She might escape us even now. She is as light as a feather. We will put her at once on a broad water lily leaf in the stream. That will be quite an island for her. She is so small and light. She can't run away from us there, whilst we are preparing the guest chamber under the marsh where she shall live." Outside in the brook grew many water lilies with broad green leaves, which looked as if they were swimming about on the water. The leaf farthest away was the largest, and to this the old toad swam with Thumbelina in her walnut shell. The tiny Thumbelina woke up very early in the morning, And when she saw where she was, she began to cry bitterly, for on every side of the great green leaf was water, and she could not get to the land. The old toad was down under the marsh, decorating her room with rushes and yellow marigold leaves to make it very grand for her new daughter-in-law. Then she swam out with her ugly son to the leaf where Thumbelina lay. She wanted to fetch the pretty cradle to put it into her room before Thumbelina herself came there. The old toad bowed low in the water before her and said, "Here is my son. You shall marry him and live in great magnificence down under the marsh." Croak, croak, croak was all that the son could say. Then they took the neat little cradle and swam away with it, but Thumbelina sat alone on the great green leaf and wept, for she did not want to live with a clammy toad or marry her ugly son. The little fishes swimming about under the water had seen the toad quite plainly, and heard what she had said, so they put up their heads to see the little girl. When they saw her, they thought her so pretty that they were very sorry she should go down with the ugly toad to live. No, that must not happen. They assembled in the water round the green stalk, which supported the leaf on which she was sitting, and nibbled the stem in two. Away floated the leaf down the stream, bearing Thumbelina far beyond the reach of the toad. On she sailed past several towns, and the little birds sitting in the bushes saw her and sang, "What a pretty little girl!" The leaf floated farther and farther away. Thus Thumbelina left her native land. A beautiful little white butterfly fluttered above her, and at last settled on the leaf. Thumbelina pleased him, and she too was delighted, for now the toads could not reach her, and it was so beautiful where she was travelling. The sun shone on the water and made it sparkle like the brightest silver. She took off her sash and tied one end round the butterfly. The other end she fastened to the leaf, so that now it glided along with her faster than ever. A great cockchafer came flying past. He caught sight of Thumbelina, and in a moment had put his arms round her slender waist, and had flown off with her to a tree. The green leaf floated away down the stream, and the butterfly with it, for he was fastened to the leaf and could not get loose from it. Oh dear! How terrified poor little Thumbelina was when the cockchafer flew off with her to the tree. But she was especially distressed on the beautiful white butterfly's account, as she had tied him fast, so that if he could not get away, he must starve to death. But the cockchafer did not trouble himself about that. He sat down with her on a large green leaf, gave her the honey out of the flowers to eat, and told her that she was very pretty, although she wasn't in the least like a cockchafer. Later on, all the other cockchafers who lived in the same tree came to pay calls. They examined Thumbelina closely and remarked, "Why, she has only 2 legs. How very miserable!" "She has no feelers," cried another. "How ugly she is," said all the lady chafers. And yet Thumbelina was really very pretty. The cockchafer who had stolen her knew this very well. But when he heard all the ladies saying she was ugly, he began to think so too, and would not keep her. She might go wherever she liked. So he flew down from the tree with her and put her on a daisy. There she sat and wept, because she was so ugly that the cockchafer would have nothing to do with her, and yet she was the most beautiful creature imaginable, so soft and delicate, like the loveliest rose-leaf. The whole summer poor little Thumbelina lived alone in the great wood. She plaited a bed for herself of blades of grass and hung it up under a clover leaf. So that she was protected from the rain, she gathered honey from the flowers for food and drank the dew on the leaves every morning. Thus the summer and autumn passed, but then came winter, the long, cold winter. All the birds who had sung so sweetly about her had flown away. The trees shed their leaves, the flowers died, the great clover leaf under which she had lived curled up, and nothing remained of it but the withered stalk. She was terribly cold, for her clothes were ragged, and she herself was so small and thin. Poor little Thumbelina! She would surely be frozen to death. It began to snow, and every snowflake that fell on her was to her as a whole shovelful thrown on one of us, for we are so big, and she was only an inch high. She wrapped herself round in a dead leaf, but it was torn in the middle and gave her no warmth. She was trembling with cold. Just outside the wood where she was now living lay a great cornfield. But the corn had been gone a long time. Only the dry, bare stubble was left standing in the frozen ground. This made a forest for her to wander about in. All at once she came across the door of a field mouse, who had a little hole under a cornstalk. There the mouse lived warm and snug, with a storeroom full of corn, a splendid kitchen and dining room. Poor little Thumbelina went up to the door and begged for a little piece of barley, for she had not had anything to eat for the last 2 days. "Poor little creature," said the field mouse, for she was a kind-hearted old thing at the bottom. "Come into my warm room and have some dinner with me." As Thumbelina pleased her, she said, "As far as I am concerned, you may spend the winter with me, but you must keep my room clean and tidy and tell me stories, for I like that very much." And Thumbelina did all that the kind old field mouse asked, and did it remarkably well too. "Now I am expecting a visitor," said the field mouse. "My neighbor comes to call on me once a week. He is in better circumstances than I am, has great big rooms, and wears a fine black velvet coat. If you could only marry him, you would be well provided for. But he is blind. You must tell him all the prettiest stories you know." But Thumbelina did not trouble her head about him, for he was only a mole. He came and paid them a visit in his black velvet coat. "He is so rich and so accomplished," the field mouse told her. "His house is 20 times larger than mine. He possesses great knowledge, but he cannot bear the sun and the beautiful flowers, and speaks slightingly of them, for he has never seen them." Thumbelina had to sing to him, so she sang, "Ladybird, ladybird, fly away home," and other songs so prettily that the mole fell in love with her. But he did not say anything. He was a very cautious man. A short time before, he had dug a long passage through the ground from his own house to that of his neighbor. In this he gave the field mouse and Thumbelina permission to walk as often as they liked. But he begged them not to be afraid of the dead bird that lay in the passage. It was a real bird, with beak and feathers, and must have died a little time ago, and now laid buried just where he had made his tunnel. The mole took a piece of rotten wood in his mouth, for that glows like fire in the dark, and went in front, lighting them through the long dark passage. When they came to the place where the dead bird lay, the mole put his broad nose against the ceiling and pushed a hole through so that the daylight could shine down. In the middle of the path lay a dead swallow. His pretty wings pressed close to his sides, his claws and head drawn under his feathers. The poor bird had evidently died of cold. Thumbelina was very sorry, for she was very fond of all little birds. They had sung and twittered so beautifully to her all through the summer. But the mole kicked him with his bandy legs and said, "Now he can't sing any more. It must be very miserable to be a little bird. I'm thankful that none of my little children are. Birds always starve in winter." "Yes, you speak like a sensible man," said the field mouse. "What has a bird, in spite of all his singing, in the winter time? He must starve and freeze, and that must be very pleasant for him, I must say." Thumbelina did not say anything, but when the other two had passed on, she bent down to the bird, brushed aside the feathers from his head, and kissed his closed eyes gently. "Perhaps it was he that sang to me so prettily in the summer," she thought. "How much pleasure he did give me. Dear little bird." The mole closed up the hole again which let in the light, and then escorted the ladies home. But Thumbelina could not sleep that night. So she got out of bed and plaited a great big blanket of straw and carried it off and spread it over the dead bird, and piled upon it thistle down as soft as cotton wool, which she had found in the field mouse's room, so that the poor little thing should lie warmly buried. "Farewell, pretty little bird," she said. "Farewell, and thank you for your beautiful songs in the summer, when the trees were green, and the sun shone down warmly on us." Then she laid her head against the bird's heart. But the bird was not dead. He had been frozen. But now that she had warmed him, he was coming to life again. In autumn, the swallows fly away to foreign lands, but there are some who are late in starting, and then they get so cold that they drop down as if dead, and the snow comes and covers them over. Thumbelina trembled. She was so frightened, for the bird was very large in comparison with herself, only an inch high. But she took courage, piled up the down more closely over the poor swallow, fetched her own coverlid, and laid it over his head. Next night she crept out again to him. There he was alive, but very weak. He could only open his eyes for a moment and look at Thumbelina, who was standing in front of him with a piece of rotten wood in her hand, for she had no other lantern. "Thank you, pretty little child," said the swallow to her. "I am so beautifully warm. Soon I shall regain my strength, and then I shall be able to fly out again into the warm sunshine." "Oh," she said, "it is very cold outside. It is snowing and freezing. Stay in your warm bed. I will take care of you." Then she brought him water in a petal, which he drank, after which he related to her how he had torn one of his wings on a bramble, so that he could not fly as fast as the other swallows, who had flown far away to warmer lands. So at last he had dropped down exhausted, and then he could remember no more. The whole winter he remained down there, and Thumbelina looked after him and nursed him tenderly. Neither the mole nor the field mouse learnt anything of this, for they could not bear the poor swallow. When the spring came, and the sun warmed the earth again, the swallow said farewell to Thumbelina, who opened the hole in the roof for him which the mole had made. The sun shone brightly down upon her, and the swallow asked her if she would go with him. She could sit upon his back. Thumbelina wanted very much to fly far away into the green wood, but she knew that the old field mouse would be sad if she ran away. "No, I mustn't come," she said. "Farewell, dear good little girl," said the swallow, and flew off into the sunshine. Thumbelina gazed after him with the tears standing in her eyes, for she was very fond of the swallow. "Tweet, tweet," sang the bird, and flew into the green wood. Thumbelina was very unhappy. She was not allowed to go out into the warm sunshine. The corn, which had been sowed in the field, over the field, Mouse's home, grew up high into the air, and made a thick forest for the poor little girl, who was only an inch high. "Now you are to be a bride, Thumbelina," said the field mouse, "for our neighbour has proposed for you. What a piece of fortune for a poor child like you! Now you must set to work at your linen for your dowry, for nothing must be lacking if you are to become the wife of our neighbour, the mole." Thumbelina had to spin all day long, and every evening the mole visited her, and told her that when the summer was over, the sun would not shine so hot. Now it was burning the earth as hard as a stone. Yes, when the summer had passed, they would keep the wedding. But she was not at all pleased about it, for she did not like the stupid mole. Every morning when the sun was rising, and every evening when it was setting, she would steal out of the house door. And when the breeze parted the ears of corn so that she could see the blue sky through them, she thought how bright and beautiful it must be outside, and longed to see her dear swallow again. But he never came. No doubt he had flown away far into the great green wood. By the autumn, Thumbelina had finished the dowry. "In 4 weeks you will be married," said the field mouse. Don't be obstinate, or I shall bite you with my sharp white teeth. You will get a fine husband. The king himself has not such a velvet coat. His storeroom and cellar are full, and you should be thankful for that." Well, the wedding day arrived. The mole had come to fetch Thumbelina, to live with him deep down under the ground, never to come out into the warm sun again, for that was what he didn't like. The poor little girl was very sad, for now she must say goodbye to the beautiful sun. "Farewell, bright sun," she cried, stretching out her arms towards it and taking another step outside the house, for now the corn had been reaped, and only the dry stubble was left standing. "Farewell, farewell," she said, and put her arms round a little red flower that grew there. "Give my love to the dear swallow when you see him." Tweet, tweet, sounded in her ear all at once. She looked up. There was the swallow flying past. As soon as he saw Thumbelina, he was very glad. She told him how unwilling she was to marry the ugly mole, as then she had to live underground where the sun never shone, and she could not help bursting into tears. "The cold winter is coming now," said the swallow. "I must fly away to warmer lands. Will you come with me? You can sit on my back, and we will fly far away from the ugly mole and his dark house, over the mountains, to the warm countries where the sun shines more brightly than here, where it is always summer and there are always beautiful flowers. Do come with me, dear little Thumbelina, who saved my life when I lay frozen in the dark tunnel." "Yes, I will go with you," said Thumbelina, and got on the swallow's back, with her feet on one of his outstretched wings. Up he flew into the air, over woods and seas, over the great mountains where the snow is always lying. And if she was cold, she crept under his warm feathers, only keeping her little head out to admire all the beautiful things in the world beneath. At last they came to warm lands. There the sun was brighter, the sky seemed twice as high, and in the hedges hung the finest green and purple grapes. In the woods grew oranges and lemons. The air was scented with myrtle and mint, and on the roads were pretty little children running about and playing with great gorgeous butterflies. But the swallow flew on farther, and it became more and more beautiful. Under the most splendid green trees, besides a blue lake, stood a glittering white marble castle. Vines hung about the high pillars. There were many swallows' nests, and in one of these lived the swallow who was carrying Thumbelina. "Here is my house," said he. "But it won't do for you to live with me. I am not tidy enough to please you. Find a home for yourself in one of the lovely flowers that grow down there. Now I will set you down, and you can do whatever you like." "That will be splendid," said she, clapping her little hands. There lay a great white marble column which had fallen to the ground and broken into 3 pieces, but between these grew the most beautiful white flowers. The swallow flew down with Thumbelina, and set her upon one of the broad leaves. But there, to her astonishment, she found a tiny little man sitting in the middle of the flower, as white and transparent as if he were made of glass. He had the prettiest golden crown on his head, and the most beautiful wings on his shoulders. He himself was no bigger than Thumbelina. He was the spirit of the flower. In each blossom there dwelt a tiny man or woman, but this one was the king over the others. "How handsome he is!" whispered Thumbelina to the swallow. The little prince was very much frightened at the swallow, for in comparison with one so tiny as himself, he seemed a giant. But when he saw Thumbelina, he was delighted, for she was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. So he took his golden crown from off his head and put it on hers, asking her her name, and if she would be his wife, and then she would be queen of all the flowers. Yes, he was a different kind of husband to the son of the toad and the mole with the black velvet coat. So she said yes to the noble prince, and out of each flower came a lady and gentleman, each so tiny and pretty that it was a pleasure to see them. Each brought Thumbelina a present, but the best of all was a beautiful pair of wings which were fastened onto her back, and now she too could fly from flower to flower. They all wished her joy, and the swallow sat above in his nest and sang the wedding march, and that he did as well as he could. But he was sad, because he was very fond of Thumbelina and did not want to be separated from her. "You shall not be called Thumbelina," said the spirit of the flower to her. "That is an ugly name, and you are much too pretty for that. We will call you May Blossom." "Farewell, farewell," said the little swallow with a heavy heart, and flew away to farther lands, far, far away, right back to Denmark. There he had a little nest above a window where his wife lived, who can tell fairy stories. "Tweet, tweet," he sang to her, and that is the way we learnt the whole story.